Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be bringing you all of the gameplay from the historic Qualifier Weekend Day 1 event that I just played in. So, I've been playing in all of the qualifiers for basically the past 3 years at this point, but I've never recorded them on the channel before, either because they're formats that I'm not really interested in and don't play that much, like Limited for example, or if they are formats that I'm interested in, I tend to want to focus more on these events. You know, I don't want to have to narrate the games as I'm playing them because I find that a little bit distracting sometimes. But what I've done for this video is I recorded the games as I was playing them without narration, and then I'm going to talk you through the games after the fact, right? I'm going to add narration afterwards. So if this is the sort of video that you like, you know, more gameplay, and you'd like me to cover future qualifiers like this in future, definitely let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to do this for all the other qualifiers going forwards if you're interested in this sort of thing. But anyway, in the historic qualifier, as you can see here, the deck that I picked to play was Blue-White Control. Now, I'm not going to break down this deck because this list is almost the exact 75 that I posted a guide on a few weeks back. So if you do want a more in-depth deck breakdown, I'll leave a link to a link to that video down in the description, which goes over the entire deck, talks you through all the decisions, and has some extra gameplay there. The only difference between that list and this list is that I swapped 2 March of Otherworldly Light in the sideboard for 2 Archon of Absolution, specifically for the Humans matchup that I'll talk about in a second. But the reason why I went for Blue-White Control is because I just felt like it was one of the best positioned decks going into the weekend. So I felt like Kethis combo was probably the most generically powerful deck, but I hadn't really had time to get reps in with that deck. I feel like Kethis is the sort of deck where, to be able to play well at the highest level, you need to get a lot of experience with it. There's a lot of little tricks with it that take a while to get used to. And so because I didn't feel comfortable playing Kethis, I felt like Blue-White Control was just the next best option. So obviously there's a bunch of Grixis midrange decks that are all reasonably good, but my issue with all of those decks was that no matter which midrange pile you pick, there was another mid-range pile that preys on you. So if you go for a super low to the ground Rakdos deck, then stuff like Mardu Reanimator has a good matchup against you. If you go for Mardu Reanimator, then the domain lists have a good matchup against you. And if you go for the domain lists, then the more low to the ground mid-range decks like the Jund Slimefoot list has a good matchup against you. So I felt like no matter what Crucius pile you picked, you could just get paired up against a bad other mid-range matchup. And I also felt like a lot of the mid-range matchups often came down to who top decks better. There felt like there was a little bit less agency in those matchups. And then on top of that, I didn't really feel comfortable with either the Kethis matchup, the Monogreen matchup, or the Revels matchup with any of the mid-range decks. Obviously, you can tech against them, right? You can try and use Crucius to tutor slaughter games against Kethis, for example, but I still felt like those matchups were pretty tough, so I wanted to avoid the Crucius decks because of that. And then Blue-White Control, on the other hand, I felt like was pretty well positioned because I felt like it had an actively good matchup against both Kethis and Revels, which were probably the 2 scariest decks going into this weekend, in my opinion. Then you're also good against the artifact decks like Affinity, you're good against most of the aggro decks like Wizards as well, and then, you know, the mid-range decks I felt were all even to good because I'm running the build with 30 lands of 4 Memory Deluge, so you have really good top decks, and overall I did feel comfortable in my mid-range matchup. So the only matchup that I actively wanted to avoid and felt really bad was the Orzhov Humans matchup. That matchup has felt really, really bad in testing, which is why I dedicated the 2 slots to Archon of Absolution, because that is basically a matchup where you're probably like 30-70 to win, but Archon of Absolution basically is not impossible for them to beat, but it slows them down so much that if every game where I resolved the Archon, I won. So it felt like it was worth dedicating a couple of slots specifically for that matchup, because it can turn your 30-70 matchup into like a 60-40 when you do resolve it. But either way, I like I said, I do feel like the deck was really well positioned. In testing, it was doing really well. I think I was something like 12-1 on the ladder, and I'm still rank 1 on the ladder from my testing with this deck. So yeah, the deck felt really good. I felt really confident about it going into the weekend. So let's just get straight into the gameplay. So starting off here in round 1. And it's kind of funny, immediately I recognise the opponent's name. I think I faced them like a day or 2 ago, and they were playing a Jund midrange deck that was very all-in on the graveyard with Jarsal, Dreadhorde Arcanist, and Tarmogoyf. Now again, I don't want to assume what deck they're on, because, you know, if I make a decision that they're on Jund, for example, and they've changed decks for the Qualifier, that's a disaster. So keep this hand, which I think is generically good, right? It's a bit annoying that we have 2 A Darker Waste that are going to deal us some damage, but we're on the play. We've got Kaleem, we've got Archmage's Charm, we've got Purge, you know, definitely a good hand. We've got a 30 land deck here as well, so chance of us missing our 3rd land, especially when we have the Kaleem, is pretty low. Opponent mulls down to 5, which is obviously good for us as well, and then we get to see what the opponent's on here, you know. So they do play a Blood Crypt, so initial thing is that they're probably on a mid-range deck, but again, I don't want to make too many assumptions here. And then, obviously, very lucky for us that they missed their second land. They must have mulled to 5 and just kept a 1-lander, which, you know, you don't want to go down to a 4 in a mid-range deck, so makes sense. Obviously, sucks for the opponent in a high-stakes event like this, but we'll take it, you know. So we pass back, we've got our third land here. Again, opponent misses their land drop, so again, sucks for the opponent. Could draw 2 off the Archmage's Charm here, but I think with the 4th land, I'd much rather save it and just be able to counter whatever they play. We've got Deluge to try and dig for another land, and yeah, again, they missed their land drop, so very fortunate for us, you know, easy first game, and the opponent just concedes to conceal information, which is actually a good idea, because if we'd known exactly what deck they're on, I probably would have sided slightly differently. So, like I said, I faced this play quite recently, and the deck that they were on was very weak to Rest in Peace, right? Like I said, they had Jarsoul, Dreadhorde Arcanist, Tarmogoyf, Teachings of the Kirin, and Croxer, so their deck is very weak to Graveyard Hate. But again, I hadn't seen green. They could have just been on straight red-black, and boarding in 3 Rest in Peace, if they are just on straight red-black, is really bad. And my main deck is basically pre-sideboarded against mid-range anyway, so even if they are on the all-in Graveyard deck, you know, with loads of Jarsouls and Dreadhorde Arcanists and stuff, I still think I've got a decent chance with how my main deck is set up. So resubmit going into game 2, and if we do recognise that they're on the same deck and it goes to a game 3, then I'll definitely sideboard differently. So this is a rough keep, but I really, you know, as long as I've got lands and something at least, I really don't want to be mulliganing this matchup at all, right? We have a lot of good draws. Okay, so we see Teachings of the Kirin, so immediately that makes me think that they are on that build. So if it does go to a game 3, I'm definitely going to sideboard differently here. So we pass back, we've drawn Memory Deluge, which is great. That's like the perfect flood insurance here. And again, it was a little bit annoying that we have drawn 1 extra land here. You know, chances of us doing that when half of our deck is lands, half our deck is spells is a little bit annoying. But then we draw an Archmage's Charm off the clean, which is obviously great. It gives us more stuff to do. If the opponent does have Thoughtseize or something here, then, you know, we can potentially draw 2 off the Archmage's Charm to try and find more gas. So they ran out Crucius here, which is a little bit annoying. You know, we didn't have the change the equation to counter that, but get to ship it back here. Teachings of the Kirin transform. So luckily we do have Archmage's Charm up here, which is quite big. And then they play Transmogrant's Crown. So yeah, I'm like 100% sure that they're on the same build that I faced, because they were also running Transmogrant's Crown in the build that I faced a couple of days ago. So I'm like 100% sure they're on the same list here. Very happy that they equip the token here, because then we can use Archmage's Charm to steal the token and basically just prevent them from attacking this turn. Now, there's an argument to holding on to Archmage's Charm there, I think, but with a hand with so many lands, I think I'm really interested in having mana open for Memory Deluge next turn to try and dig for something like a Divine Purge. So this just basically slows down the opponent's attacks, keeps us at 20, which is important. And they do ditch the Croxer, so if this does go to a game 3, definitely going to be sideboarding differently here. So we draw another Archmage's Charm off the top, which is really great, because now if they do play something that we want to counter, we can just snap off the Archmage's Charm. If they don't, then we can just go for Memory Deluge, which is good, obviously. So I think at this point the opponent has enough creatures in the graveyard to escape Croxer, which I didn't realise at the time, but obviously they've milled stuff off Teachings of the Kirin, and they choose to exile the Archmage's Charm over the Kaleem, presumably to get a counter on, so that, you know, we can't just block their creature and we have to offer the trade here, which we do. You know, I think essentially using the Archmage's Charm to kill 2 of their creatures is a good exchange for us for sure. And then I think, if I remember correctly, they escape the Croxer here. Yeah, it looks like they do. So I think we have to snap off the Archmage's Charm here, right? We can go for Memory Deluge, hoping to find a Divine Purge, but if we don't find it, we're in real trouble. So I think snapping off Archmage's Charm makes the most sense there. Basically wastes their turn, essentially, although they do get another Crucius trigger, and they discard a Crucius naming Ambitious. So now we know they have their top-end card here, right? So we're not 100% sure what that top-end card is. I think when I faced them, I did see Minsc and Boo, which is very scary at this point, because we don't have a counter spell. But, you know, I still think using Archmage's Charm on the Croxer last time was correct, because if we don't find Divine Purge, we're in real trouble there. And we wouldn't be able to go Purge and hold up a counterspell this turn anyway, unless we found Change the Equation as well. So they do play the Minsc and Boo. That was the top-end card that they cheated for. Unfortunately, we're not running a 1-mana counter. You know, if we're running Spell Pierce, then it's best to snap off Memory Deluge beforehand, but they do get to resolve the Minsc and Boo, so we're in a really rough position here. We have to really hope to hit well off the Memory Deluge. So they're attacking in for 9 here. Thankfully, we did manage to prevent their earlier attacks. So we do kind of stabilize at 6 here. But now they have Hive of the Eye Tyrant as well as a threat. And they get another Crucius trigger. So this game definitely looking pretty rough for us. They choose not to activate Crucius as well, which is a very bad sign. But we get Memory Deluge off here, and we find Divine Purge and Soul Partition, which is pretty decent. You know, that's one of the best hits we could find off Deluge, and we draw a Teferi here, which is pretty nice. So now we can purge away their Crucius, the 4/4 token, and the Transmogrant's Crown, and Soul Partition the Minsc boost, so that they basically can't cast it next turn, right? They would need an extra 2 mana to be able to do that. Now, unfortunately, they do have Hive of the Eye Tyrant, and they can put us on a 2-turn clock here, but we do have Field of Ruin as a way to stop that on the second attack, and we have Teferi as well, so we are pretty far behind, and we're in a dangerous spot here, but it's definitely not game over by any means. If they do choose to attack with Hive, then the next turn just plays itself, but they play Shieldred instead, which is a little bit unfortunate. So now I think the only play here is play Teferi, tuck the Shieldred, and then we're not dead to Hive of the Eye Tyrant here. And if we can untap with Teferi, we have a chance here. Although we have got a hand of all lands. So if they ever escape Croxa here, we're taking 3 off that as well, which is a little bit rough. So definitely pretty far behind, but not completely dead here. And then the opponent has Chandra. So their deck obviously has a ton of top end here. But, you know, going into game 3, I feel like so much of their deck, because I've seen it before, is weak to Rest in Peace. So I feel like if we can get Rest in Peace in the deck, that should give us a big edge here. So changing sideboarding here, bring in the 3 Rest in Peace. And because, you know, typically I'm not the biggest fan of 3 Rest in Peace against mid-range decks, but like I said, I've faced them before and they were on Jarsil, Arcanist, Tarmogoyf, Teachings of the Kirin, Croxa. So Rest in Peace does shut off a huge amount of their deck. So whenever I bring in Rest in Peace, I always cut Kaleem, because Kaleem with Rest in Peace in player is just pretty horrendous. And we do have Shark Typhoon in the sideboard, which is, you know, I think Kaleem in general is better than Shark Typhoon, but when you bring in Rest in Peace, Shark Typhoon is just better. So we cut the 4 Kaleem, bring in the 3 Rest in Peace, bring in the single Shark Typhoon, and just run it back. And, you know, even though Rest in Peace is a card that's bad to draw in multiples, they are obviously going to have discard spells. And like I said, Rest in Peace is so good against their specific build of the deck that it definitely felt worth bringing in here. So we're on the play here. We have Rest in Peace, we have Soul Partition. We don't have the second white for Wandering Emperor yet, but if we can resolve the Rest in Peace, we shut off so much of their early pressure in Arcanist and Jarsil, and Teachings of the Kirin as well. Teachings of the Kirin is really bad with Rest in Peace because the flip side basically just does nothing. You know, they do get a 2/2 token off it, but like I said, you know, the backside can't exile anything from the graveyard. They don't have a turn 1 discard spell, which is huge. You know, had they been able to get rid of Rest in Peace, the game may have looked a little bit different here, but we get Rest in Peace in play. Now, annoyingly, we have a tap land for next turn, but we still have the Soul Partition as early interaction. They have Teachings of the Kirin, so the first chapter, you know, the milling is basically going to do nothing for them. And then we do draw an untapped land, which is nice. You know, means the Castle of Ventress is going to enter play untapped, which is pretty decent. Don't have the second white for Wandering Emperor quite yet, but I still feel pretty confident about our spot here. Right, we have Soul Partition if they have Crucius. Jarsil basically does nothing in this position because we have their graveyard on lock. They do play Tireless Tracker, which is interesting. But not a card I've seen, you know, in Jund for a while, but we get to Soul Partition that before they get any advantage off it. Don't find the second white, but we do find a Memory Deluge, which we can hopefully use to find us the second white here. So Teachings of the Kirin flips, but again, with Rest in Peace in play, that's basically going to be doing nothing. So opponent does play a second Tireless Tracker and presumably has a land here to get a clue immediately. So we could use Soul Partition, but I think it just makes a lot more sense to be more mana efficient here and use Memory Deluge to dig for hopefully a second white land. So we do find a second Rest in Peace, which we don't really need at this point. You know, they are running Jund, so they could have answers, but I think we want definitely the Hallowed Fountain, and then it's between Emperor and an extra land here. And I decided to go for the second Emperor here, which I think is pretty reasonable, right? You know, second Wandering Emperor is probably better than a land, although we do want to keep hitting land drops at this point, but you know, Emperor is a card that's always going to be good against them. They're going to have to attack us to win, and so, you know, having Emperor as an instant speed removal spell is decent. They're going to have to attack down the first one anyway, or it's going to start producing tokens for us. So I think I think I'm pretty happy with that play overall. You know, I could definitely see an argument for the extra land, especially when we have a Teferi here, but I definitely think that the second Emperor is better in hindsight. So they attack with everything here, which makes sense. We get to flash in the Emperor here, and then exile their Tireless Tracker. And then, you know, it would have been a really big punt to make a token here, because if they have Fatal Push, they can kill it, and they can obviously make Tireless Tracker bigger by sacking the clues. So get to exile the Tireless Tracker, and the fact they sack a clue in response is really big, because my concern here was that I would flash in the Emperor and then they would play something like a Minskamboo or a Shieldred, but the fact they draw off the clue means that they don't have any of those cards in hand, which is a relief for me for sure. So we only take 3 here, which is pretty nice. Then we see an Arcanist, so very happy to have the Rest in Peace in play here. We can minus the Wandering Emperor to make a token here, and then we can either pass with another Wandering Emperor, or I think it's pretty safe to just slam Teferi here, right? You know, we've got Soul Partition off the untap, and even with that Hive of the Eye Tyrant, because we have the Soul Partition here, if they fire it up, we can still defend the Teferi, and that wastes their entire turn doing so as well. So looks like they are going for the Hive of the Eye Tyrant here. Probably going to attack Teferi with everything, and then when they do, we can just use Soul Partition to exile. We can't use Soul Partition on the land, unfortunately, but we can use it to get rid of the 2/2. Then we can use the 2/2 token to kill their Kirin, and then Teferi survives at 1 loyalty here. So that was a huge turn for us, right? They spent their entire turn trying to kill Teferi, and we ended up taking out 2 of their creatures, and Teferi survives at 1 loyalty. Rest in Peace in play is obviously great against the Dreadhorde Arcanist, so feel very confident about our position now. Now, we could go for Wandering Emperor here, but I think it makes more sense to go for Deluge. I think Wandering Emperor is generally best to play during the opponent's turn. And I'm going for Field of Ruin here because of the Hive, obviously, and then Irrigated Farmland. I feel like we definitely have enough lands at this point, so I'd rather get a land that we can cycle away. And I think the Farmland is really nice with Teferi because we can cycle it away during our main phase to make use of the untapped mana, if that makes sense. So opponent plays the Tireless Tracker and still hasn't played their land for turn, so they can produce another clue token here, but you know, I feel even if they are producing clues, we're going to be drawing a card every single turn, and we're in a pretty sick position anyway. So even though, you know, I would rather save the Wandering Emperor to be able to exile the Tireless Tracker, I feel like just getting tokens in play here is going to make a big deal. It's going to make it really hard for them to attack down with Teferi here, which, even though they're going to get clues off the Tireless Tracker, I feel is worth it. And, you know, off the Teferi, we can start digging towards removal. Now, this is a spot here where I'm not sure if I made the correct play or not. I decided to plus the Wandering Emperor here so that I can attack with it, but if they've kept him Fatal Push against us, we don't have any removal here, right? So if they had decided to kill one of our creatures, there's a chance that we would have lost one of our Planeswalkers here, which is definitely a risk. So in hindsight, it could have been better to minus the Wandering Emperor there. I'm not 100% sure, because the advantage of plussing it here as well is that if they do attack with the Tireless Tracker and we can chump block it, we can then exile the Tireless Tracker with the Wandering Emperor next turn and it still survive, which is a pretty big deal. Whereas if we minus, we don't have access to the exile ability of the Wandering Emperor, and they are getting a lot of card advantage off the Tireless Tracker. So the opponent duresses us, which basically does nothing at this point, right? We have all the remaining 3 Teferis in hand. They just get rid of one of them, so that was kind of a whiff for the opponent, because, you know, I very much doubt this game is going to come down to the 4th Teferi. They are drawing a lot of cards off the Tireless Tracker, like I said, but thankfully, you know, one of the reasons why I thought I could get away with the plus on the Wandering Emperor there was that I very much doubt they're going to be keeping in Fatal Push against us, and so I think we can reliably chump block the Tireless Tracker here, and then if we get to exile it, that's a pretty big deal. So they do get Crucius into play, and they do get, you know, Tireless Tracker survives, and they choose not to attack with it, which is interesting, because they obviously want to keep getting card advantage off it and not have it die to the exile of Wandering Emperor, but that enables us to scry off the Castle Vantress here and hopefully find an answer. So Deluge and Change the Equation, I'm pretty happy with both of those. I think the card I'm most scared of at this point is Minskamboo, right? I feel like that is a way that they could get back into the game from this position, and so we get to keep both. We can plus Teferi to draw the Change the Equation, and now we have an answer for Minskamboo, which makes me, you know, feel a lot more safe in this position. Gonna main phase the Deluge here to try and find an answer for the Tireless Tracker if we can. Unfortunately, we just keep picking lands, which is a bit unfortunate, but, you know, thankfully we clear those 4 lands off the top to hopefully find more gas going forwards. And now we have 3 tokens in play. We still have Wandering Emperor at 2 loyalty to be able to exile the Tireless Tracker if they do choose to attack with it, which they're going to have to do at some point, right? If they have trimmed removal from their deck, they're going to have to start attacking our Planeswalkers, or we're just going to run away with the game. Although, having said that, if they're drawing a card every turn off Tireless Tracker and we're drawing a card every turn off Teferi, it is kind of even, but our deck generally goes way over the top of them, so I feel like we definitely have the inevitability here if they're just going to sit on this Tireless Tracker and draw every single turn. So again, they keep activating the Tireless Tracker, and I think, the reason why they haven't done that much is probably because Rest in Peace is so good against so much of their deck, right? I think if they're playing a slightly less all-in on the graveyard version of the deck, and there's a Minsc and Boo, very happy to see that one go, but yeah, if they were playing a less all-in on the graveyard version of the deck, I think they would be able to apply more pressure here, and they might be able to take advantage of the fact that we flooded out quite a lot. But either way, we get another Scry for the Castle of Vantress here, which is great. Hit another Memory Deluge, which is perfect. That's exactly the card we want to see at this point. Get to plus the Teferi, see what we hit, and then, Deluge, if we can find something like a Kaleem here, we can tap down the Tireless Tracker and exile it, which would be great. Get rid of their source of card advantage, although Crucius is also doing quite a lot of work. We find the Divine Purge, though, which is like the perfect card in this spot, so we're definitely going to play the Divine Purge here, and there's nothing they can do about it from the Jun's side, so I think it makes sense to attack first with the tokens here. Now, this does kind of telegraph quite a lot to the opponent that we do have a sweeper here, or it could telegraph that we have a second Wandering Emperor and we're making a very risky line, but, I think more than anything else, this probably telegraphs that we have a sweeper. Now, very interesting, I don't know why they do this, but they animate the Hive as a blocker. Maybe they just don't want to take any unnecessary damage at this point, which kind of makes sense, but we get to exile their Hive with the Divine Purge without needing to use the Field of Ruin on it, which is a really big deal for us, so we get to sweep their entire board, minus with the Wandering Emperor, and now I feel really safe at this spot, right? We don't have an immediate answer to Shieldred, but at worst, we can just tuck it with Teferi if we really need to. We're discarding to hand size at this point. Chapter 2 of Teachings is going to do nothing. Chapter 3 of Teachings is going to do nothing. Try and play the Tireless Tracker. We're just going to Change the Equation on that now. They've used so much mana to try and cast this. And we still have the second Change the Equation for a Minsc and Boo if they do have that. So they also play Crucius, and like I said, this does take us off counter spells for Minsc and Boo, but at this point, I feel like we're so far ahead that I'm not even sure Minsc and Boo would be able to get them back in the game at this point. And we drew an Archmage's Charm off the top. Maybe it's best to let them have the Crucius here, but I just felt like we definitely have the advantage here. We might as well start pressuring the opponent. So I'm going to fire up a Hall of Storm Giants here. We can attack, get the untap, and then, the two creatures in exile are going to enter tapped. So they need, I guess the Teachings is going to flip into a 1-1 as a champ blocker, but I feel at this point they're on the back foot. They're down at 3 life already, so maybe it was a little bit greedy, but yeah, the opponent just scoops it up. So yeah, very happy with how that game went. Obviously, the opponent was playing a very all-in graveyard deck that Rest in Peace hits, but yeah, overall pretty happy with that game. Okay, so we're on to round 2 here, and we're on the draw, which is obviously not ideal, but this hand looks pretty good, right? We've got a lot of early interactions, so as long as we're not against a control deck, very happy with this keep. Got to keep it in the dark, though. So, opponent leads on Den of the Bugbear into Prospector, so we're against Goblins, so very happy that we kept this hand now. Still not sure which variant of Goblins we're up against yet. I think with this hand, I would prefer it to be Gruul, because we have Soul Partition and Change the Equation to deal with Revels, which is pretty big. But opponent plays Blackcleave Cliff, so we're up against Rakdos, which, not the easiest matchup. I mean, we're not sure which build they're on yet, but they do either have a lot of hasters or a lot of value creatures, but I think Change the Equation really changed the dynamic in this matchup, right? Having an additional counter spell that can stop Muxus that's also good against their early creatures is huge, so opponent plays Chieftain. Now, I am tempted to go for Change the Equation here, but I think at this point in the game when we have Divine Purge, I would rather save Change the Equation for Muxus. And because they don't have anything crazy to play at the 4-drop slot, what I do is I let this through. Again, there's maybe an argument to using Soul Partition, but I don't really want to give them access to something like a Chieftain later. So I basically just let them hit me, which does take 8. It's because I'm going to go for Divine Purge this turn. Now again, the downside of this is we do take an extra 2 off the Hallowed Fountain, so we do go down to 8 here, which is definitely risky against a deck with a lot of haste creatures, but in hindsight, I still think this is a good play, right? We get to exile their entire board here. They don't have enough mana to go for Den of the Bugbear yet, so all they can really do here, I think the worst play they could make is Chieftain or something. Actually, no, having said that, they do play Crucius, which is a bit annoying because it could potentially help them tutor for Muxus, but we have enough mana to go Soul Partition and hold up Change the Equation here. So they pitch the Munitions Expert, pick Ambitious. So we can go for Castle Vantress. So yeah, I mean, the downside of going for Purge is it does enable them to potentially cast Crucius like they did. Going to set a stop during the second main phase because we want to exile the Crucius before it gets another trigger. But I still think that was right because, had we used Soul Partition or change the equation on Goblin Chieftain, they would still have a Prospector and a Horde Master in play, so we would probably want to purge anyway, if that makes sense. So I'm pretty happy with how I've played this one so far. Gonna Soul Partition now. You know, if they do choose to go land into Crucius here, then we can still go change the equation. So this is an interesting spot. I did say I want to try and hold change the equation for Muxus, but I feel like we don't really have a good answer to Fable right now. And even though the opponent is, you know, they do miss a land drop, which is huge. I was going to say, if they did have a land drop, they'll be one turn away from a potential Muxus. But, you know, I've learned from playing in the past, you can't afford to play around everything. And because they're running the Crucius build, I do feel like they're probably not running that many Muxus. And so I feel like it's right to change the equation there, or we have Fable in play and then we have to expend resources dealing with Fable, whereas now we can just use Memory Deluge to try and dig towards either an Archmage's Charm or a change the equation to be able to answer Muxus. And perfect hit here. We hit both Teferi and change the equation, so now we can go Teferi plus and hold open change the equation going into the opponent's turn. If they choose to play a Chieftain, for example, then it's going to enter tap, so we don't really have to worry about that either. So very happy with how we've played so far. Like I said, it does, you know, there is definitely an argument to be made about not using change the equation on Fable and trying to save it for a Muxus, but I've been in spots like that a ton of times in the past where you want to save your counterspell for their worst possible, and then you let something like a Fable resolve, and then you end up losing to the Fable. So I'm pretty happy with how I've played so far, I think, looking back on it. They do have the Muxus by sacking the Prospector. I mean, thankfully we had to change the equation, so if we hadn't hit change the equation off the Memory Deluge, then we could have potentially been in trouble there, but I still think on balance it was probably the right play, because we'd have had to deal with Fable here instead, which would have been generating the mana. It would have got them extra looting, so if they didn't have Muxus, they'd be likely to find one anyway. So we don't find anything good off the Deluge, but I mean, we do find a Cycle land, which does, you know, enable us to dig a little bit further, and we keep hitting land drops as well, which is important. And now we have Soul Partition, Otawara, and Kaleem available, which is pretty sick. So I feel pretty confident about our spot here. So see what the opponent does. I can't actually quite remember what they do in this spot. I mean, they can potentially fire up Den of the Bugbear, but instead they decide to go for Crucius, which I imagine I'll probably use Soul Partition or Otawara on to stop them getting the trigger. So yeah, we go for Soul Partition here, which makes sense. And then, you know, there is an argument to maybe cycling the farmland and trying to hold Kaleem as a way to tap down one of their creatures, but I think getting Kaleem online quicker makes more sense, because we want to get it in play as a creature. You know, they do have 3 creatures in exile, so we do want to start closing out the game if possible here. And then we hit Field of Ruin, which is really nice, and then to make use of this Fairy untap, I'm just going to Field of Ruin the Den of the Bugbear now, so we don't have to worry about it. If they had a second Den of the Bugbear, then I think we have to hold on to Field of Ruin to activate it in response to them firing it up, but since we want to make use of the Teferi untap mana, I think it makes much more sense to just fire it off now. Then we ship it back, see what the opponent's got here. So I think this might be a turn. So basically I thought that they were running the same build that I posted, which only has a single Muxus, but they do go land into Muxus here, which is obviously a bit of a concern. We don't have a counterspell in hand. We could have cycled the farmland to try and find one, but they do kind of whiff. I mean, even if they hit a Chieftain, we could still bounce it with the Otawara. So thankfully, you know, I'm kind of glad that I didn't cycle away the farmland here, because since they didn't hit a haster, it enables us to dig for more interaction here. Now we can plus the Teferi, use Divine Purge to make use of the untapped mana, and then we have a number of ways to deal with the Muxus here. Obviously, preferably would use the Soul Partition on it, because that then means it's 8 mana rather than 6 if we use the Otawara on it. But now we get to sweep the board with Divine Purge, untap here. Have to discard to hand size, but that's not really a big deal. I think we discard the Darker Wastes, and now, you know, I feel like we're in a pretty sick spot now. We have 2 change the equations to counter whatever they've got. We can ultimate the Teferi and have a second one in hand. So obviously if they'd hit a crazy Muxus hit, that could have won them the game, but, you know, the only way that they can attack off the Muxus immediately is with either Chieftain or Battlecry Goblin, and Battlecry Goblin only works if they also hit Prospector and have enough Goblins in play to activate it. And if they had hit a single Chieftain, we can just bounce it with the Otawara. So they'd need an insane Muxus hit to win from that point. So even though they did get to resolve a Muxus against us, which, like I said, I wasn't really expecting because I thought they were on my build, I still feel like we had a, you know, we probably would have survived anyway. So they go for Chieftain into Cacophony Scamp. Bouncing the Chieftain here is pretty nice because it keeps the tax from the Esper Sentinel. So it costs them 5 and enters tapped if they do play it. Now we go for Soul Partition. You know, obviously it will allow them to recast Muxus later, but it costs 8 mana and they're stuck on 6 mana, so I very much doubt that's going to end up mattering. Plus, we're going to Ultimate Teferi here and start exiling their lands anyway, so get to -8, get Teferi in play, start plussing, get rid of the Cacophony Scamp, and then, since we have 2 change the equations here, I think I just draw 2 off the Archmage's Charm to just get rid of 2 of their lands, cut them off. You know, if they've got a third Muxus in hand, that completely cuts them off that as well. Just limits their ability, especially when they have a bunch of taxed stuff in the exile zone, just limits their ability to cast multiple spells in a turn. So yeah, opponent just scoops it up. So that felt pretty good overall. You know, Goblins was a previously tricky matchup for Goblins, but I think Change the Equation really switched the dynamic on this matchup. So here I'm thinking about bringing the Supreme Verdict as the only real sideboard card here, I think. And then I'm not sure really what to cut to make room. I think we can probably trim the third Deluge to make room, and then potentially an extra Wandering Emperor as well. Now, Emperor is good in this matchup, but they are running a more low to the ground build, right? They're running the Cacophony Scamps and stuff, so they are a slightly more aggressive build. So I do think Supreme Verdict is probably slightly better than Wandering Emperor here. So I think that's all. Yeah, that is all the sideboard cards I'm thinking about bringing in this matchup. But yeah, overall, you know, them playing a slightly faster build is probably the more worrying version of the deck from my point of view. You know, the Sling-Gang Lieutenant build is generally better against mid-range decks, but probably worse against control just because it's slower, right? It gives us more time to sweep the board. We don't have to worry as much about their fast aggressive start, which, you know, you'll see in this game that the fast aggressive starts are definitely problematic for control. So this is definitely the variant that I'm most worried of, I think. You know, the Gruul Cabretti Revels build is scary as well, but we have so many answers to Revels. We have Change the Equation, even if we're on the draw. We have Soul Partition as well. So I think out of all the builds of Goblins, this is probably the one that I'm most scared of facing from the control side. So going to run out the farmland on turn 1. Could potentially see an argument to trying to cycle that, but we have, you know, we have a bunch of 4 and 5 drops in hand, and they get Battlecry Goblin in play, which is a real issue for me at this point. If we had Soul Partition, I wouldn't be too worried, but annoyingly we hit an Archmage's Charm here as well. I think it's more important to have changed the equation up this turn in case they play like a Goblin Chieftain or something, but Battlecry Goblin is a real issue here because, you know, they can potentially just, you know, pass and just keep pumping their board. So I think we're forced to counter Exuberant Fusing here, because if they have an untapped land, they can just pump their whole board and then they start making tokens off the Battlecry Goblin, which is definitely a big issue for us here. So even though we're not thrilled to have to do that, I think we do. And then annoyingly, because of the Field of Ruin, we don't have mana up for Archmage's Charm here either. So they do activate the Battlecry Goblin. Thankfully, they don't get a token because we did counter the Fuseling, but you know, we really need to draw Soul Partition to stabilize here. Unfortunately, we draw another Archmage's Charm, which we just don't have the mana to cast because of Field of Ruin here. So, kind of awkward start. I mean, again, if we'd had Divine Purge or Soul Partition, this game kind of gets flipped on its head. But Battlecry Goblin, if it's unanswered, just forces through so much damage against us. So, opponent plays another Cacophony Scamp, activates the Battlecry Goblin again, boosts their board up. So, we're taking, you know, a lot of damage here, and they get an extra token as well. So we basically need to find a sweeper at this point. Even then, we're taking 4 damage off the... Oh, I guess if we did use a Supreme Verdict, it would only be 2 damage off the Cacophony Scamp. And annoyingly, they also have a second Den of the Bugbear as well. So even if we do find a sweeper here, and if they find another untapped land, they can just fire up Den to start attacking as well. So yeah, we basically just need to find a sweeper here or we lose. So this just shows the power of Battlecry Goblin. And specifically, this is the kind of reason why I think this variant of Goblins is the most scary from the control side, because if they're running a bunch of 1-drops, these starts with Battlecry Goblin are so much faster, right? They're so much more threatening. So opponent wins here unless they mess up. My only out at this point is I'm going to wait for them to pump first, so that they can create an extra token. Then we use Archmage's Charm to steal a Cacophony Scamp, and there's a very small chance the opponent might choose not to attack because they don't want the Cacophony Scamp to kill one of their creatures. But, you know, they have lethal on board here, and the opponent does recognize that as well. So we steal the Cacophony Scamp. they just end up attacking anyway, and we're just dead on board, unfortunately. So we do just basically lose this one to Battlecry Goblin. Again, if we'd found Divine Purge or Soul Partition earlier, then we'd be able to stabilize. But this does show the power of Battlecry Goblin in this matchup. It is probably the scariest card outside of maybe Muxus in this matchup. So we do go to a game 3, but being on the play is going to make a huge difference here, right? Change the Equation can then counter Battlecry Goblin if we have it in our opening hand. So even though we do lose that one, I am much more confident into going into game 3 on the play here. So here, obviously on the play, which makes a big difference. And yeah, I was very happy to see this hand, right? We've got a lot of early interaction here. Got a sweeper as well, and Kaleem is just good at tapping stuff down. You know, we've got the Soul Partition. So, you know, I wasn't as worried about Battlecry Goblin beating us down as last game. And I was also very happy not to see Skirk Prospector on turn 1, because one concern with this hand potentially is that they can go Prospector into either Fable or Crucius or Chandra Dress to kill. Although we do have Soul Partition actually, so if they go for any of those, I think Fable would have been the only one that I was worried about there. If they had gone for Chandra or Crucius, we can just immediately exile it with the Soul Partition. So thinking about it, that's not really much of a concern here anyway. They do go for Battlecry Goblin, so again, we're just, well, I was very happy to be able to Soul Partition that before it starts activating, right? It's a real concern if we let them untap with the Battlecry Goblin like we saw last turn. So going to ship it back. You're going to play the Deserted Beach instead of the Field of Ruin, just to represent Archmage's Charm here, you know, make them play around slightly more stuff. They go for the Goblin Chieftain, and I think, yeah, I just tap down the Chieftain here to prevent some damage, and then presumably I'm just going to go for a Sweeper next turn. I think I probably prefer going for Supreme Verdict here while they don't have a Battlecry, while they don't have a Runveld Hordemaster in play. And now we've drawn to Change the Equation, I'm definitely more incentivized to go for the Supreme Verdict at this point, because that means that we can then potentially go Divine Purge and hold open Change the Equation next turn, which is really nice. And then, you know, like I mentioned, Divine Purge is much better when they have Hordemaster in play, because if you go for a Supreme Verdict when they have Hordemaster in play, they get a bunch of death triggers off that. So they just go for a Battlecry Goblin here. I can't quite remember if I snap off a Divine Purge here or not. I think, yeah, makes more sense to pass back because, you know, if they do play creatures out, then we can just purge after they play them. And Battlecry Goblin on its own isn't really that threatening. Although having said that, they do go for a Fuseling here. So that represents 4 damage immediately. No token here yet, though, thankfully. They do go for another Fuseling, though. So this is the damage here is starting to add up, right? That's 6 plus an extra token is 7. So I'm debating going for a Change the Equation here to try and prevent some of that damage. But we are at 15. And, you know, we can afford to probably let them go, activate the Battlecry Goblin, get in for a bunch of damage, and then go Purge and hold open Change the Equation as well. You know, I'm kind of happy for them to run their hand out. Now, the third Fuseling is a worry, because now that's, what is that, 8 damage plus an extra 1, that's going to be 9. Again, that puts us down to 6, which is a reasonable amount. I think there is an argument to potentially countering this just to prevent some extra damage, but, you know, I think 6 is a reasonable life total to be at, specifically because they have 1 card left in hand. And, you know, Purge is going to basically make all their stuff unplayable for a while, right? You know, they'd have to spend an extra 4 mana to get the Battlecry Goblin back out, which we can just counter straight away. So that was kind of risky, but I think it's still probably worth it. So here, again, debating whether to go for Supreme Verdict or Divine Purge. I think it makes more sense to just go for the Supreme Verdict, because otherwise they can just start replaying all that stuff again. And had they had Runveld Hordemaster or Cacophony Scamp, going for the Verdict there would obviously be more concerning, but when they only have 1 card left in hand and we've got Change the Equation up, I feel like it's safer to just go for the Supreme Verdict there. So they go for Chieftain, going to snap off a counterspell at that. If I didn't have the second Change the Equation, then I might have had to think about that one a little bit more, but thankfully we did, so didn't have to worry about that. And now, you know, I do feel fairly confident about this spot. We have got Change the Equation and Divine Purge to deal with whatever they've got, and we've got the Hall of Storm Giants as well. But we don't have anything super proactive. I guess the Hall does kind of count, but we're not quite at the point, you know, we don't have enough mana where we can attack with Hall and still hold open, Change the Equation. But we have a lot of good top decks here, right? If we can draw a Teferi, a Wandering Emperor, or a Kaleem, we're in a great spot. So we do draw a Kaleem, which is great. You know, we don't have enough mana to hardcast it, which is a consideration. You know, if I had 1 more mana, I could see hardcasting the Kaleem and then holding open mana. So opponent does have Muxus, which was scary. Thankfully, we have the Change the Equation. Now, that does run us out of counter spells, but we do get a draw off the Kaleem. We get another draw for our draw step. So And we hit a Deluge, which is obviously great. And now we find Teferi. So I feel like as long as they don't have exactly another Muxus this turn, then we're good. And even if they do, they need to hit a Haste Lord. If they don't hit a Haste Lord, we have Purge to sweep it up and Teferi to tuck the Muxus. But thankfully, we do find we found an Archmage's Charm off the top, which is great. So opponent goes for Chandra just to kill, which I'm going to snap off a counterspell again. I feel like if they had Muxus, they would just jam it anyway. So get rid of the Chandra. Now, opponent does have a Crucius, but they have nothing in hand, so they don't get any immediate value off it, which is obviously great for us. Now we can plus the Teferi. We can potentially go for Purge on the Crucius and then hold open Memory Deluge in the opponent's turn, which is what we decide to go for here. So if the opponent wants to go for Crucius, they basically just waste their entire turn cycle doing so, which we're really happy to see. Then we get to go for Deluge to potentially find an answer. So I'm going to snap off Deluge beforehand just to try and find a counter spell. We find 2, which is really good. Now again, there is potentially an argument to holding a counter spell for a potential Muxus, but we found 2, so it makes sense to just snap one off on this Crucius here. And now we're approaching the ultimate. We have a counter spell in hand, we have Deluge in hand, and we found another Kaleem off the top as well. So I'm going to snap off the Deluge main phase to make use of the Teferi untap. Find a Purge and another Hall of Storm Giants, but I think we're just going to go for the farmland here as just an extra draw, make use of our mana during the opponent's turn. And now I feel like we've basically got this locked up now. Opponent plays Cacophony Scamp, which I just don't care about at all at this point in the game. And then just going to jam another Deluge here, just to try and make sure that we have answers for literally anything the opponent could have. I think we could have gone for Kaleem to get a creature in play, but at this point, I'd rather use the 7 mana on Deluge just to make sure that we have answers for literally everything. And then since I'm not going to use the Teferi untap here on anything else, I'm just going to play a tap land just to do something with the Teferi untap. So opponent plays Chieftain. I'm just going to change the equation here. There is potentially an argument to using Archmage's Charm, but, just on the off chance they're running like a black spell that we need to be able to counter, I'd rather save the Archmage's Charm. So now we can use Kaleem to tap down the Cacophony Scamp, get the Kaleem creature into play, and now we get to ultimate the Teferi, so I'm pretty confident that we're going to win here. Now, I do consider cycling the Kaleem, but then I remember that Teferi's going to ultimate here, so I should save all of my card draw effects until the ultimate pops off. And now, I feel we can just start closing the game out at this point, right? No matter what they draw, we have counter spells, we can start exiling their lands or permanents with our draw effects. So, run out the Castle Vantress, and now Kaleem can tap down a creature and exile their stuff. We've got 2 counter spells, we're going to be exiling a bunch of their lands. Now, they do go for Sokenzan on the channel, but again, I'm not concerned about that at all. Basically means they've only got 2 mana spare if they do have anything else in hand. So I'm going to use the Kaleem to tap down one of the tokens and exile the Cacophony Scamp. And then if they do attack with the second Sokenzan token, we can just animate the Hall of Storm Giants to block it and still have mana open for Archmage's Charm as well. And we drew another Teferi, which is just going to start exiling all our lands. So managed to win with 2 Teferi ultimates here, which is pretty sweet. But yeah, that felt pretty good overall. Okay, so moving into round 3 here, I was on the play, which is obviously great to see. And this hand is sick as well, right? We've got a lot of early interaction. We've got Teferi's top hand here as well. So very happy to keep this one. And yeah, just obviously going to run out the Hallowed Fountain tapped on turn 1 here, save a bit of life. And see what the opponent's on. So Swamp into, I believe, Thoughtseize. Oh no, it was an Inquisition. Okay, so definitely against one of the well, we're not 100% sure, but, odds on that we're against a mid-range deck here, which very happy to keep a 7 on, right? One of the main reasons why, in general, since the Crucius decks have started dominating the format, I typically try and keep 7s in the dark as often as possible because mulliganing is a real issue in this sort of format, particularly when the opponent goes discard spell into Croxus. So, interesting decision point here. I think I did go to pitch the Divine Purge instead of the Teferi because we have Soul Partition to deal with any creatures that they play. Going to play the Farmland tapped here in case we draw a Deluge off the top, which I think makes sense. But I think there's a reasonable argument to discarding a Teferi, but I think my main issue there was I don't want them to Thoughtseize and then we have no top end. But opponent misses land drops here, which is, obviously great for us. I choose to play the Field of Ruin over the Otawara in case we keep drawing lands. One thing I've learned is that making slightly suboptimal plays to conceal information isn't really worth it. I mean, either way, opponent scoops it up for missing land drops there. So, obviously, sucks for the opponent, very unlucky for them, especially in a high stakes event, but we take those, obviously. So in terms of sideboarding, even though I did bring in Rest in Peace against that Jund deck, typically I don't sideboard at all against the mid-range decks unless they have some, unless they're very all in on the graveyard like we saw earlier, because our main deck is basically pre-sideboarded against the mid-range decks, so no sideboarding to do, which makes things pretty easy here. So going into game 2 here, obviously on the draw, the first thing going through my mind when I was going into this was I will keep any 7-card hand that has at least 2 lands. Even if it was a 7, I'd probably have to think if it was an all land hand, but I've already kept in this event 6 lands, 1 spell, just because I think mulliganing is so bad against the Rakdos decks. You really, really want to avoid mulliganing at all. So I basically keep any hand that has at least 2 lands in. So opponent is on Thoughtseize here. Probably going to take the Archmage's Charm if I had to guess. I can't actually remember what they do end up taking here. Actually, I think they might have taken Kaleem, which was kind of odd to me, because that does get the Kaleem train rolling, right? They get a Kaleem in the graveyard, we get one back in the top of our library. I mean, I guess that does cut us off early plays in general, right? We don't have anything before turn 3, so if they do have a fast start, that does enable them to get in for more early damage, but I kind of expect them to take Archmage's Charm here. I mean, having said that, they do have the Harvester, so kind of makes sense they want to get in for damage wherever possible. Now again, this is another spot where, not playing Hall of Storm Giants does seem weird, but I think I wanted to have access to Divine Purge, right? If I drew a Divine Purge off the top and they play something like a Crucius, then being able to go Divine Purge, sweep up Crucius and the treasure is pretty important. But they go for Liliana, so I mean, again, not 100% sure that's correct. We don't have Divine Purge in hand, and the chances of us drawing it are fairly low, but I think it's a fine play there. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, either way they get Liliana in play, they plus. We do actually draw the Divine Purge. I forgot that happened, but I don't think it's particularly good to play in this spot. I think I want to hold up Archmage's Charm, either to counter something or to draw 2 here, because Liliana ticking up is going to hit us both equally. So if I'm getting card advantage, it's probably going to hurt them more than me. I mean, either way, I think I definitely do wait here to see what they play before drawing 2, because if they play something like a Crucius, although having said that, if they do play a Crucius, I think there's an argument to going Archmage's Charm, draw 2 into Divine Purge. Although that would give them a Crucius trigger, so I'm not 100% sure that would be correct. So opponent pluses Lily here, which I think we'll probably just discard the Divine Purge, right? Because if they do play Crucius, we can counter it. And like I said, waiting for Divine Purge probably isn't great because it does give them a Crucius trigger. So discard the Divine Purge. I think keeping land drops is important here. So obviously, we are drawing 2 here, which does pull us ahead in terms of Liliana putting us to a low resource stalemate, but the issue here is we need to find an answer to Liliana, right? So the main things I'm looking for here are either Teferi to be able to tuck it, or Soul Partition to be able to exile it. So opponent has Culligan's Command here, so I'm definitely going to discard a land, because, we do want Deluge to be able to dig us for an answer here. So we do have Kaleem here, which is interesting for sure. I think this is only our second Kaleem of the game, right? So, if it was our third, we could just cycle it, get a 5/5 into play and start attacking the Lily, which would be great. We do have Wandering Emperor here, though, so if they don't play any creatures here, we can just go Wandering Emperor, start making tokens to attack it, which would be pretty big. And they discard a Bone Crusher, so that could be some way for them to kill our tokens. But unfortunately, they play another Blood-Scythe Harvester, so I think... And Liliana is about to ultimate, so I think it makes much more sense to use the Deluge here to try and find a Soul Partition. Unfortunately, we don't find it here, so Liliana is going to ultimate unless we draw a Soul Partition or Teferi for turn. I definitely think we want to get Kaleem here, because we can still cycle Kaleem to make a big creature. Now, I think this is a point where I messed up. So we definitely need to get Kaleem here to get something on board. I think I take the Archmage's Charm here when I should have taken the land, because I think we need to assume that Liliana's ultimating here, unless we happen to get very lucky, right? We need exactly Soul Partition or they ultimate the Lily. The other thing that I just realized is if I had gone for a land, that also enables us to potentially top deck a Teferi. So opponent does ultimate the Lily. So yeah, I should have gone for a land there instead of Archmage's Charm. Not only because if I draw to Fairy, I can then go to Fairy Tuck Liliana, but also because if they do resolve the ultimate here, we can cycle the Kaleem to get a 5/6 in play, and then we will presumably keep 3 lands here, right? Because they can only go 3/2 split, and then if we do pick a land instead of Archmage's Charm, we automatically have the 4th land to be able to then use Wandering Emperor. Whereas instead, I believe I missed land drops here. Yeah, so we find a Teferi, and we also have Kaleem on top, so we know we don't have a land for the next turn. So definitely should have gone for the land instead of Archmage's Charm, because then we can go, even though they've ultimated a Liliana here, we're actually ahead on board, which is kind of crazy. I mean, they do have 2 3/2s, but it's post-sideboard, so they're very unlikely to have a way to kill Kaleem at this point, right? They could have kept and go for the throat potentially, but yeah, so not taking a land instead of the Archmage's Charm does definitely slow our ability to develop down. So that was definitely a misplay on my part for sure. I remember thinking that at the time, after it happened, I should have definitely done that. So opponent does top deck very well, but we do have the answer for it. So the reason I was debating going for Archmage's Charm here is because it's just more mana efficient, right? I would ideally like to save Change the Equation in case we get to a point where we can go Kaleem plus Change the Equation or Teferi plus untap with Change the Equation, but I end up going for Change the Equation here just because I don't want them to, top deck land into a Shieldred, for example. I feel like Archmage's Charm is very important at answering Shieldred. I mean, having said that, they don't actually have the 4th land yet, so maybe that was a misplay on my part. Maybe I'm supposed to be more mana efficient, go for Archmage's Charm, and then this turn I represent, both Change the Equation and Kaleem, so I could counter something and tap down one of their creatures if that's relevant. But either way, finding the 4th land is huge here. Means that we now have Wandering Emperor online, which is very big on this board state. So we'll see what the opponent does here. So they loot away a land, and then I can't actually remember what they draw at this point. But either way, I feel pretty good here, right? We can, regardless of whether they attack or not, we can flash in the Wandering Emperor and start getting tokens into play, which makes it very difficult for them to attack. They do find a Den of the Bugbear, which is a bit of a concern because that enables them to start attacking. But again, we can get Wandering Emperor into play here. We do have to take a damage off the Adarka Waste, which is a concern, but we can get at least 2 tokens down here, which makes life a lot more difficult for the opponent. So we get the Emperor down. Can minus, I'm pretty sure I minus again here, right? It'd be very greedy to plus. And we do find another Change the Equation, which is nice. And now we do have both Kaleem and Change the Equation. I mean, having said that, had we kept the land, I think we'd be so much further ahead, right? If I'd taken the land instead of the Archmage's Charm, we would have got Wandering Emperor to play a turn earlier. We would have got Teferi into play by now with Change the Equation and Kaleem back up. So, it's crazy how that one choice of Memory Deluge gave the opponent a much more of a chance to come back in this game than they would have had otherwise. So again, very good top deck for the opponent, but we have the counter spells available here, so we can counter the Seasoned Pyromancer, stop them drawing 2. And an interesting spot here, I can't remember whether I cycle the Kaleem or not. I think it's probably best to deuce. Actually, I'm not sure, because cycling away Kaleem does get us closer towards the 5th land for Teferi, which would help us start running away with the game. But ideally, we would like to draw the land and then untap with Kaleem back up. So, I mean, having said that, I think, just getting to that 5th land is the most important thing. So I imagine I do cycle away the Kaleem here if I can remember correctly. But I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to see. I think in hindsight, I probably would have done. I mean, the opponent doesn't really have good attacks here, right? They can crew up the hearse, but they know about the Kaleem in hand, so we can just tap it down. Unfortunately, we don't have Wandering Emperor at 2 loyalty, so we can't exile the hearse if we do that yet, but still, I don't think it's a worth the opponent attacking it. I think the opponent's in the tank because they're debating whether they want to crew up the hearse here or not. So yeah, they go to combat past the end of the turn. I do cycle the Kaleem, which makes sense. Tapping down the hearse also makes sense because it forces them to activate it straight away. I mean, they do get to exile the Kaleem in the graveyard, but again, that's not a big deal because we've already got the Kaleem in play, so they do exile cards from our graveyard. We get to draw a card here. I can't actually remember if we do draw another land. Okay, we find a Deluge, which is interesting, and another Deluge. So I think this turn kind of plays itself, right? We just plus the Wandering Emperor. I guess the other nice thing about tapping down the Unlicensed Hearse there was that we can freely attack with this 3/3 here, because they can't corrupt the hearse as a blocker. Not that it's really going to end up mattering. You know, we'll get in for the free damage wherever we can, but you know, I think at this point in the game we were just focused on, well, I was just focused on trying to stabilize, trying to get to a point where we can get Teferi into play. And yeah, like the night and day difference it would be had we got Teferi into play 1 or 2 turns ago. Had I kept that land is pretty huge, because now, you know, again, we know we don't have a land on top, although we do have the Deluge, so if the opponent doesn't play anything crazy here, we can just Deluge into another land, hopefully. So Croxer is another pretty good draw for them. It gets a card out of our hand and potentially enables them to crew the Unlicensed Hearse for free here. So I think we just discard a Deluge here, right? We would definitely want to keep the Teferi as our like top end win con. We already have a Deluge as well. So yeah, it looks like opponent's crewing up the hearse. So they crew up the hearse. Croxer goes to the graveyard, and they must have, you know, yeah, they got 10 cards in the graveyard, so they had more than enough cards to escape the Croxer the following turn. So now we need to figure out a sequence where we can hopefully get Teferi into play and have an answer to Croxer as well. Now this is an interesting spot. So they try and kill the 2/2 with Bloodtithe Harvester to force us to chump block with the Kaleem. Thankfully, you know, even though I said that getting Archmage's Charm was a misplay, which I still think it is, we do get kind of a cute play here where we can use Archmage's Charm to steal the opponent's blood token, because actually, they wouldn't have been able to kill both of our creatures here anyway, right? They can kill one of them with the Harvester, but they would need 2 blood tokens to kill the 3/3 anyway. So that wouldn't have been a complete blowout, but I still thought that was an interesting play, and I still think that was the right line, right? It enables us to keep a creature into play, denies them a, you know, keeps them off, what am I saying? Yeah, basically just stops them, because otherwise we're forced to block with the 3/3 here. So, I mean, again, I could maybe see an argument to letting them do that. I think at the time, I thought that they could kill both of our tokens with the Harvesters. We do draw another land off the top, which is pretty sick. So yeah, even though we did get to essentially kill one of their Harvesters for free with the Archmage's Charm, had we picked a land earlier, like I said, we would have had Teferi in play for like 3 or 4 turns at this point, and we'd be so much further ahead. So I think here I'm debating whether I should minus the Teferi or plus. I think it makes much more sense to plus here, because if we were going to minus it, would just be getting rid of the hearse, and we have so many chump blockers in play that I don't think that's really going to matter at this point. So just going to go to the end step and untap here. Right, we can't attack with anything because they've got the hearse available as a creature to create up. So yeah, thinking about it, I think at the time, last turn, with the stealing the blood token play, I thought that they could kill both of my creatures, but looking back at it now, I think it might have been correct to just hold on to the Archmage's Charm there, because they would have just traded Harvester with a 2/2 had I not stolen the blood token, right? And I think at this point in the game, having a counterspell is probably more impactful. So if they had, you know, if this token on the left here wasn't a 3/3, then I definitely think stealing the blood token was correct, but looking back on it now, I'm not even sure that was the correct play. But either way, they escape the Croxer here. And so we could either discard the Teferi or discard the Kaleem. I think it makes more sense to go for the Kaleem. Discard the Teferi, hold the Kaleem. Because Kaleem then prevents Croxer from attacking next turn, which is pretty big. Which is, I hope, what I go for. You know, there's a chance I might cycle the Kaleem, channel the Kaleem here, but no, okay. So I didn't make a misplay there, right? I think it's very important to save Kaleem to tap down the Croxer so we don't get discarded here. And we have another change to the equation, which is nice. It means we can shut off, you know, if they had drawn any more Seasoned Pyromancers, we could have used to change the equation to shut that off, which is pretty nice. And then, yeah, okay, so go for Field of Ruin to, you know, make use of the Teferi, untap mana, cut them off the Den of the Bugbear here as well. So even though I've got a Croxer and a big Unlicensed Hearse in play, I feel like we have so many tools at this point to, you know, keep them from attacking our Planeswalkers down, keep them from getting in for lethal, that, you know, we're definitely just pulling ahead at this point. You know, having said that, you know, had I picked a land off the Deluge earlier, I think we'd have probably been ultimating Teferi by this point and probably already won the game, but, you know, we're still in a reasonably good spot, having said that. And this is after a Liliana ultimate, to be fair, so this was quite an interesting game, I think. So, I can't remember what they draw at this point, but either way, we have changed the equation for anything that isn't shielded, basically. We have 2 Kalims here as well. You know, if we do tap down the Crocs, so we can potentially exile it with the Wandering Emperor to gain some life back, which is a big deal as well. You know, so I saw Bone Crusher earlier, so I think one of the ways that we could lose this, I mean, we do have changed the equation in hand, but, you know, if we end up having to take an extra damage off a Dark Oasis, we're then dead to 2 Stomps. Shieldred is also an issue because, you know, we don't have a way to counter it, and that would deal 2 as we got to the draw step. So we're not out of the woods yet at this point. So they go to combat. We'll obviously tap down the Croxer here to stop them, you know, forcing a chump block and helping us discard a card, or forcing us to discard a card, rather. So they can obviously crew up the Hearse here, but, you know, we can just chump block it with a 2/2, so that's not really a big deal. So yeah, I guess opponents in the tank, whether they want to crew the Hearse up. I mean, they almost certainly should at this point, I think, because, you know, the only reason not to would be to exile stuff from the graveyard, and at this point, you know, exiling Kalims is pointless while we have one in play. And we drew a Soul Partition at this point, so that's a pretty good draw, obviously, because now we do have an answer for Shieldred, so that definitely shuts off one of their outs. So they obviously go face here, and then we're just going to be chump blocking with the 2/2. So the 2/2 dies, but again, in a really good spot here. We've got to change the equation for, like, Seasoned Pyromancer. They do have the Shielded, so we drew that Soul Partition just in time. I mean, having said that, even if we hadn't drawn the Soul Partition, we take 2, and then we can, you know, potentially tuck it with the Teferi, which, you know, isn't ideal, but still would have been fine, I think. Drew another Soul Partition here, so lead on plussing the Teferi, and then I think I minus the Wandering Emperor here. Actually, no, wait, we drew a Divine Purge off the top, which is obviously sick. So I think my original plan at this point was to minus the Wandering Emperor, but now I think I plus on the Kalim, which makes sense. You know, we could potentially Purge first and then minus the Wandering Emperor, but I think this is probably a better line because it basically puts them dead on board to Kalim next turn. And, you know, like I said, they could have kept in Wandering Emperor. They could have kept in Go for the Throat as a way to kill the Kalim, but they need to draw it this turn, and it would completely tap them out as well. And, like, Teferi's approaching the ultimate at this point anyway, so I feel pretty good. I mean, obviously that was a good draw, but we could have still exiled the Croxer anyway, so I think we would have been in a good spot regardless. Yeah, opponents in the tank at this point, but I think this might be game over. I think this might be when they concede. I don't think they have any outs at this point. So yeah, they just scoop it up. So yeah, even though we made a mistake off the Deluge, which was quite costly, we managed to get there in the end. Okay, so going into round 4 at 3-0, feeling pretty good about that. And then I see another opponent that I recognise. So again, not 100% sure because they could have changed decks, but I recently faced this player on ladder when they were rank 4 or something like that, and they were playing the Grixis Archfiend of the Dross Alteration combo. Now again, I don't want to make too many decisions based on that yet in case they're not playing that deck, but kind of got a feeling they might be on that deck. Now, this is a really interesting point here where I decided to go for Horn and Storm Giants instead of Irrigated Farmland, which does potentially cut me off playing Divine Purge on turn 3, and also means that if I want to play Soul Partition, I have to play a Darker Wastes. And we do draw the Divine Purge, so I'm still not 100% sure about that line. Looking back on it now, I think it's probably correct to play the Farmland first. I'm not 100% sure though, but either way, they take the Soul Partition to clear the way for Crucius. So I choose to cycle the Kalim now, which doesn't really make sense. I think I probably should have waited until they use the Crucius so they have less information, but now it's an interesting point here because I think I would have liked to have access to Divine Purge here, so I think I made a mistake on the off. I probably should have led on the irrigated farmland on turn 1. Again, that would have meant that Hall of Storm Giants would enter tap later, but at least I would have then had the option of playing Divine Purge here, which I think would have been decent, right? Dealing with Crucius and the treasure is pretty important. Although having said that, we did draw Change the Equation, so having a counter spell to be able to counter their top end threat seems quite important here, I think. By the way, we'll see what they play here, right? If they don't play anything crazy, we can, you know, change the equation it. So they do choose to go for Inquisition, and I think to try and save the Divine Purge here, I'm just going to snap off a Change the Equation, which I think makes sense, right, looking back on it. You know, I think Divine Purge is going to be very important here, particularly if they play another creature. Now, they've only got red and blue mana, so I don't know if they would be running any... You know, most of their creatures will be black-based, I think. But either way, I think this is definitely a turn where we're interested in going for Divine Purge, because not only does it get rid of the creatures, it also gets rid of the treasures. Now, having said that, I think it would have been better to do last turn, because if they do have an untapped land, they can just replay Crucius immediately. And the annoying thing is, if they do have an untapped land, you know, typically if they just have Crucius as the only creature in play, we could go to Fairy minus. But since they have Den of the Bugbear, if we go to Fairy minus, they can just fire up Den and attack it down. Now, it looks like they didn't have the 5th land, but they did have another Crucius in hand at this point. So this was, I remember thinking about this turn for quite a while, because again, we could go to Fairy minus, but now they've got the treasure, they can just fire up Den, so we would lose to Fairy immediately. The alternative line here is Divine Purge, hope they don't draw a land, and then, you know, potentially follow up with Teferi the following turn. And considering Teferi is our only real action that we've got going on here, I think I like the line I went for, which was just Divine Purge, hope they don't draw a land. Because again, you know, we can go a Darker Waste to Fairy minus, but they're basically guaranteed to snap off Den of the Bugbear attack. Whereas at least this way, if they don't draw another untapped land here, they can't play the Cruciuses and they can't fire up the Den either. So I think that was probably the better line. Looking back on it, I do remember thinking that neither of those plays were really ideal. Unfortunately, they did find the 5th land, which means they can now go Crucius, and now we're basically in the same spot again, right? But we don't have access to Divine Purge anymore, so I think we're basically forced to go Crucius here. Forced to go to Fairy, and we can either minus or plus. I mean, plussing does have the higher upside, right? If we find a Kaleem or a Soul Partition, for example, then it's a lot better. But the thing is with this line is we get rid of the Crucius here. It basically forces them to fire up the Den, which means they spend their entire turn not recasting Crucius here. So I think, and we've got Triple Hall of Storm Giants here. So I feel like that was probably the better line looking back on it, but I'm not 100% sure. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think. By the way, so this is a spot that I want to highlight here. So basically last turn I chose to play the Adarka Waste untapped to represent March of Otherworldly Light, on the off chance that it might disincentivize the opponent from firing up Den of the Bugbear. Because if they fire up Den and we have March, they kind of get blown out there. But that meant that we had to shock in this Hallowed Fountain this turn, right? If I hadn't bluffed March of Otherworldly Light last turn, I could have played Hallowed Fountain tapped. So I ended up losing 2 life here in order to hold open Hall of Storm Giants, which does end up costing me later in the game. So, you know, one thing I've learned from this weekend, which I think is quite important, is that I think the value of bluffing, unless it's... I don't know, I just think the value of bluffing in general is bad if it ends up costing you actual, you know, downsides in the game, like having to lose 2 life to a shock land, for example. Either way, rather than holding up Hall of Storm Giants, I end up cycling away for Kaleem here. And you know, another reason why I wanted to have Hallowed Fountain untapped was so that we could go cycle Kaleem, potentially hit Archmage's Charm. But yeah, like, as I said, I think the equity of playing a Darker Waste rather than Hallowed Fountain was a mistake, because even if I'm representing March of Otherworldly Light, I think it's probably, the opponent is forced to attack with Den either way, so there's no real point in bluffing in that spot. And like I said, the 2 life does end up costing me later, so I definitely think that was a misplay on my part for sure. I think, you know, there are some spots where bluffing is worth it, but if the opponent is kind of forced to go for the play regardless, I think bluffing, I mean, setting stops to bluff is basically free, so that's fine. But if you're in a spot where you're losing life in order to bluff, it's probably not worth it, especially in a matchup like this where your life total is quite relevant. So the opponent attacks in. We don't have anything, so I'm just going to fire up Hall. Now, they could have Fatal Push, but if they do have Fatal Push here, you know, they end up spending 4 mana in order to do so, which means they can't cast Crucius. So And we have 2 more Hall of Storm Giants, so I'm not too worried about it, to be honest. So yeah, opponent's definitely considering something here, right? This does give me a read that they probably do have a Fatal Push, or they would just, go straight to blocks. Although again, maybe they could be bluffing. But either way, they choose not to go for Fatal Push whether they have it or not, which means we do get to eat the token, and then they do have Archfiend of the Dross, so now there's no doubt in my mind they're on the same deck that I saw them on ladder. They have 2 Archfiends of the Dross, which is a ton of pressure, right? So, that's obviously representing lethal. So we do draw Teferi here, and now this is the point in the game where me having to shock in that land costs me, because we can go Teferi minus on the Archfiend, but then we're taking 7 from their creatures on board plus 4, so it's exact lethal. If we hadn't had to shock in that Hallowed Fountain, we could minus on the Archfiend and survive. We do end up plussing, and we do hit a Memory Deluge. So I'm basically trying to represent Settle the Wreckage or Wandering Emperor here. But yeah, again, like I said earlier, if I had gone shocked, if I put a Hallowed Fountain into play tapped a few turns ago when I cast the previous Teferi, I could have survived here basically. So opponent decides to attack. I could have gone Memory Deluge to try and find Kaleem, but like I said, tapping down the Archfiend doesn't make a difference. So I'm basically trying to represent Wandering Emperor here. If I go for Memory Deluge, then it doesn't make a difference. Or I'm trying to represent Settle the Wreckage as well. So I do Deluge just to see what I would have hit, and I do find a Kaleem. So again, had I not tried to bluff with the Adarka Waste and just played the Hallowed Fountain tapped, I could have also gone to Fairy Plus, used Deluge to find Kaleem, tapped down one of their Archfiends and survived as well. So I basically ended up, it's not a foregone conclusion that I could have won that from that position, but I would have had a much better chance of winning that game had I not tried to bluff March of Otherworldly Light. If I just played my Shockland tapped, then I would have had a chance at surviving and potentially winning that game. So that's kind of, definitely something that stuck in my mind as something I'd learned from this weekend, in that bluffing, if it's free, is worth it. Or if you're in a point where you're going to lose, if you don't represent something, then it's worth it. But if it's just kind of a throwaway thing, especially if you think the opponent is likely to go for that play, regardless of whether you bluff it or not, right? In that situation, for example, the opponent's basically forced to activate Den, or Teferi is surviving there. So I think bluffing March is basically pointless. So if I'd played that Hallowed Fountain tapped, I could have then just gone Teferi. I probably would have minus because it's much safer. Teferi probably would have died there, but then we would have drawn Deluge off the top. So yeah, I mean, not a guaranteed win if we do play like that, but definitely something that I remembered from playing that match for sure. So this hand, again, we're not against a pure mid-range deck because they are running a combo, but they are a Thoughtseize deck. I'm pretty sure they're going to be balling an extra discard against me. So even though we've got a 6-lander, I was very happy to keep this because, farmland is basically a draw spell when we need it to be. So they do open with Inquisition. So again, I'm glad I didn't mulligan for that reason. And then we can just run out Hall, and then we can potentially go for Soul Partition or just cycle away the farmland depending on what the opponent does here. So they go for Hearse, which is interesting. So we're not worried about that now. In fact, I was actually pretty happy to see Hearse at this point because, it's much better than them playing a creature like a Bloodtithe Harvester or something. Now we've drawn 2 Memory Deluge. I think I was interested in playing the farmland just because we want to keep hitting lands, right? We've drawn into gas now, so I think it's more important for us that we keep hitting land drops to be able to Deluge and then, cast what we hit off the Deluge. The Hearse is a potential issue because it does exile the Deluges, but I mean, again, we're pretty happy, about the front side of Deluge. We don't necessarily need to go for the flashback. So they do corrupt the Hearse here, which is interesting. And I think this is an interesting spot. I'm not sure 100% this is the right play. I think I choose to exile the Hearse here, which I'm not 100% sure on that looking back on it, because letting them get the treasures off the 2/2 isn't ideal. And unlike Divine Purge, the Hearse is going to enter untapped. Plus, they're getting mana off the 2/2 that's going to enable them to more easily recast the Hearse. So, looking back on it, I'm not sure about that play. I mean, I guess my thought was if I Deluge, then they're not going to be able to immediately exile it with the Hearse. But, I think that's the least of my worries at this point, right? You're not going to be flashing back Deluge until turn 7. At least until you have 7 mana. So, looking back on it now, I think it probably would have been a better play to exile the 2/2 token and deny them the mana. Either way, they do just choose to recast the hearse, and, you know, yeah, looking back on it, I think I should have just taken out the 2/2. I think there's very few situations where you shouldn't take out the 2/2 when they've got a Fable. Either way, we got a pretty decent hit off the Deluge there, and then we drew into a Teferi as well, so that was a really good sequence for us. Now we can go Teferi, we can plus, and then we can tap down one of their creatures with Kaleem. I mean, again, they do have Hearse here, which so they can, you know, if we do tap down the 2/2, they could crew up the Hearse and attack Teferi for 2, but Teferi is basically guaranteed to survive the first turn cycle, which is absolutely huge. And then next turn we have, you know, Emperor and Deluge as well, which is pretty sick. So if they do play another creature here, I mean, I guess they can also crew the Hearse with Reflection as well. But yeah, I mean, having Kaleem here is just basically going to ensure Teferi survives unless they had like a Molten Impact or something like that, like a damage-based thing to pick it off. But yeah, either way, very good position for us for sure, right? The opponent doesn't have too much on the board. You know, Teferi is basically guaranteed to survive here. We can tap down the 2/2, then we've got Emperor as well to defend Teferi. Now, them untapping with Reflection could be annoying for sure, but, you know, my thought process at the time was there's a good chance they might crew the Hearse with Reflection, in which case we can just kill the Reflection with the Wandering Emperor. So we do tap down the 2/2 in response to the Thoughtseize here. Just so that, you know, because they could potentially Thoughtseize the Kaleem and just get in for extra damage to, you know, make sure the Teferi is more likely to die here. Interesting spot of the opponent for Thoughtseize. End up taking Wandering Emperor, which I think was the right play, because that, you know, that's basically our only removal, and they do have a decent amount of stuff on board now to pressure Teferi. So opponent does end up crewing the Hearse here and attacks down Teferi to 3 loyalty, but doesn't have any burn spells, so Teferi does get to survive, which is huge, and then we can potentially Deluge during the main phase to try and dig for extra removal, which is pretty important. So we do go for the Deluge main phase here, and we hit very good here. We hit 2 Kaleems and a Change the Equation, so I think I like the line I went for here, right? We got 2 Kaleems, and because we already have a Change the Equation in hand, so we can potentially tap down stuff. Now, the Reflection here does make things a little bit awkward, right? Because if we tap down the Reflection, they can make a copy of the 2/2. Then they can also crew up the Hearse. So, you know, I think there's a decent chance that they can attack down the Teferi here. And the other thing is, we already have a Kaleem in the graveyard, right? So if we can sequence things where we force the opponent to use the Hearse, we can potentially cycle away the third Kaleem in response to the Hearse in order to get back the Kaleem from the graveyard. Now, the awkward thing here is they've got an Archfiend to the draw, so I think we're forced to tap down the Reflection now. Otherwise, they'll make a copy of the Archfiend, and we don't have a way to kill it. Now, that does force them to then make a copy of the 2/2. And now we're in a weird spot where if we tap down the 2/2, they can crew up Hearse and kill the Teferi. But if they use the Hearse to attack, that means that we then get Kaleem back from the graveyard. So we're basically in a spot right now where we either don't get the Kaleems back and Teferi survives, or we do get the Kaleem back and Teferi dies. So, I mean, I guess either way, it's kind of a good thing for us. Like, we end up with a decent... We end up keeping a big threat on the board either way, but the opponent has the choice to pick whichever one is best for them, which obviously isn't, you know, ideal. So opponent is obviously considering exiling the Kaleems here. I guess they're trying to figure out whether they're better off being able to deal with the Kaleem or the Teferi, and from their point of view, I think the line they went for makes sense because they already have an Archfiend of the Dross in play. Kaleem is a 5/6, whereas their Archfiend is a 6/6, so I think from their point of view, getting Teferi off the board is more of an issue because the Archfiend can still attack past the Kaleem here. So I do like the opponent's line there. Thankfully, we draw an Otawara, which is a pretty sick draw here because I'm guessing the opponent's next turn, they're quite likely to want to copy the Archfiend of the Dross to start applying a bunch of pressure. And us bouncing the Archfiend in response to that is pretty big game. I do like that line a lot. And we draw an Archmage's Charm, which is sick as well. So obviously not going to attack here. So I think we just ship it back. And then, yeah, we've got Otawara. We've also got Archmage's Charm here, which is pretty sick. So So I think the opponent does go for the line I was expecting here. They do try to copy the Archfiend of the Dross, which then basically, blanks the reflection activation for a turn and forces them to, have to spend 4 mana to recast the Archfiend if that's what they want to go for. Now that does enable the opponent to exile the Deluge. We could have potentially just jammed Deluge there to make use of it in our graveyard, but I feel we're under too much pressure if we let them make the copy of the Archfiend, and we also have Archmage's Charm that we could use to draw to if we need, but instead I'm just going to use the Charm to counter the Archfiend here, right? I feel like with Archfiend not on the board, they don't have great targets to copy with the Reflection, whereas if they do recast it and start copying it with Reflection again, that's not great for us. And then we drew a Divine Purge, which is just obviously the nuts here, right? We get to get rid of the Hearse, the Reflection, and the 2/2. And then we can start closing the game out, right? The opponent's at 14, they're on a 3-turn clock with Kaleem. We also have Hall of Storm Giants potentially and Castle Vantress, so that was obviously a sick draw for us, but I feel like we're in a reasonable position even without that, but that definitely presses our advantage in a big way. We also have Change the Equation in hand, so if they try to recast the Fable, we can just counter it immediately, which, I think in this position I remember thinking if they do that, I'd be very happy to, because, they're spending 5 mana to do that. That means they basically have no mana left to do anything that powerful. So they do end up going for for the Fable. We just counter it straight away. It does mean we don't get the scry off the Castle Vantress, but that's not a big deal at all. We're super far ahead on board at this point. We draw another Divine Purge, which is great, but at this point I'm just going to fire up the Hall of Storm Giants, and then we basically just have lethal here unless they have... I don't even know what they could have to get them out of that, right? Because of the ward on both creatures. So very happy with how that game went. Didn't really feel like I made too many missteps there, if any. And in general, I think this matchup did feel pretty good from my side. I feel like this Archfiend deck is quite new to Historic, and from what I've seen, it seems to be, built to focus on the combo, and I think this is probably the matchup where the combo is the worst, right? Because we have barely any creatures. The creatures that we do have, we can defend with counter spells and stuff. We can soul partition our own creatures if they try and copy it with the alteration. And so, if I was going to build the Archfiend deck, which I am working on at the moment, actually, hopefully I'll have some, stuff to cover on it relatively soon, but I would, against control, I think my focus would be to cut the alterations and just focus on being a low-to-the-ground disruptive mid-range deck. But since the Archfiend deck is kind of new, I'm not sure people are really prepared for control with it because it's not that popular a deck right now. Either way, this hand is pretty weird, but I really don't want to be mulliganing against the Thoughtseize deck. I basically just said to myself, if I'm up against the Thoughtseize deck, I keep any 7-card hand that has at least 2 lands, because this is the advantage of running a 30-land deck, right? We're super confident that we can keep hitting land drops, so we can afford to keep any 7 land that has at least 2 lands. That's one of the big advantages of playing this into a mid-range meta. Opponent does have Go Blank, though, which is kind of a concern, right? I thought I was in a good position because I've got Change the Equation and Kaleem. I end up discarding 2 Memory Deluges, which might seem kind of mad, but I don't want to be taking greedy lines here, and I think having 2 Kaleems is very strong because it means as soon as we hit that first one that we've put back in the deck, we have a 5/6 in play, and most decks aren't going to keep in creature removal against you. They're really going to struggle to deal with the 5/6, and so I just kept the cheaper cards in our hand because I was confident with the top of my deck that I would be able to get there. So we got Field of Ruin, and then I take an interesting line here. We could represent Archmage's Charm and Memory Deluge, but I choose to try and cut them off blue a little bit here. I assume they wouldn't have a basic island in the deck, and the only play that we really have here is Kaleem. So again, this is another spot where I think bluffing stuff is a little bit overrated, right? I would much rather take the line where I don't represent Archmage's Charm, I don't represent Memory Deluge, but I can't potentially cut them off blue mana, which is quite important. Now, they do have Crucius, which basically gives them access to blue mana, which is a little bit annoying, but now we can cycle Kaleem, and now we have Teferi as well, and we hit another Kaleem, so I'm in a really good spot now. If we hadn't hit Kaleem, we could go potentially Teferi, tuck the Crucius, but now we found another Kaleem, we can plus the Teferi, use the Kaleem to tap down the Crucius and get, I think at this point we already have 2 Kaleems in the graveyard, right? So we can potentially get the 5/6 back straight away. Opponent goes for Expressive Iteration, which I'll let through. I'm kind of surprised. I'm kind of surprised they played the land out first, but I guess they didn't have any blue mana, so they had to without using the treasure there. And then they do find a Fable, so this is an interesting spot here, where we could Kaleem and get a creature back, but I really don't want to let them get any more filtering off the Crucius if possible, right? Especially because they... you know, they have had a fairly slow start. So I end up going for Soul Partition here, which I think I do, yeah. I end up going for Soul Partition here, which does enable them to cast the Fable, but I feel like Crucius really unlocks their hand. It really unlocks their ability to play mana. If they do want to play the Fable here, they end up having to use up their treasure. We already have the Kaleem that can tap down the 2/2 to deny them the treasure, so I just wanted to slow down their ability to unlock their hand here. And so we just play the Hall, untap, and then we're in a really good spot here, right? We can tap down the 2/2, get back Kaleem from the graveyard, deny them the treasure. They're a little bit choked on mana compared to us, so... And then we also have the Wandering Emperor here, which is great as well. You know, we can potentially exile the 2/2 if we want to completely cut them off treasures. So we get Kaleem back. We can start applying pressure back to the opponent as well. Purge is obviously great here because once the Fable flips, we can exile that. If they go land into Crucius, we can go Divine Purge as well, which is really great. It gets rid of the Crucius and the treasure token as well. We've got another Kaleem on top of the deck to stop them attacking as well, so feel very good about this position. We got off to a really good start in this game, which is kind of interesting because we did have a kind of a clunky start. So opponent does play a cheaper Crucius from hand. I'm just going to change the equation that just to deny them, again, just to deny their ability to unlock their hand more, if that makes sense. So plus the Teferi here, obviously, and then I can't quite remember what I do here. I think there's an argument for just going Wandering Emperor here to get rid of the 2/2, deny them the treasure. But then the Kaleem doesn't really do much in our hand. But again, we can then untap with Teferi and represent a second Wandering Emperor, right? So we do go for Wandering Emperor, which I do think makes sense. I would assume I don't attack with Kaleem here. I mean, maybe there is an argument to attacking with Kaleem, but since they have Den of the Bugbear, I feel like we're so close to the Teferi ultimate that the opponent's basically forced to expend all of their resources to try and kill Teferi at this point if we play defensively. If we attack, the opponent can just go Den of the Bugbear. And even though we have Wandering Emperor, they can at least attack Teferi with the 1/1, which cuts us off the ultimate for another turn. So I quite like playing defensively here. Although again, you know, going offensively does put the opponent on a four turn clock as well. So interesting line there. I think I prefer playing defense though. Then the opponent plays a Chandra, which I was not expecting at all. I mean, thankfully we have a way to kill that, right? We can if they plus, we can go Wandering Emperor, make a token, tap down the Reflection, and attack down the Chandra. And that is a little bit of a concern as well because what was I saying? Yeah, like the 1 damage every single turn definitely does add up, but thankfully because we have Kaleem, we actually do have a pretty fast clock. So because we have this second Kaleem in hand, we can uptick Teferi to 8 loyalty. Which is pretty important because now we're representing the ultimate and we can kill the Chandra here. So I plus on the token, tap down the Reflection to enable the Kaleem and the token to attack in to kill the Chandra here, which is obviously very important. I feel if we keep letting the Chandra uptick, it's going to be hard for us to win. And then I think I should have played this. Yeah, I think that was another mistake there. I think I should have played the Adarka Wastes there because I can't activate Hall of Storm Giants with the mana I have available right now. So the opponent could go Den of the Bugbear, attack Teferi with everything, and put it an extra turn away from potentially ultimating. So I think that was another misplay there. I was just thinking I should play the Adarka Waste here. So that was maybe I was kind of thinking of the previous game where I played the Hallowed Fountain untapped and it ended up costing me, particularly with this Chandra emblem going on. But yeah, I definitely should have played the Adarka Waste there because now I can't represent potentially going for Hall of Storm Giants. So opponent goes for Inquisition here. So I end up countering it, which kind of makes sense. And now it doesn't really matter with the what was I saying? Yeah, it doesn't really matter with the Hallowed Fountain now because that ended up mattering. But if they had gone for Den of the Bugbear instead, I really would have wanted to be able to activate my Hall of Storm Giants. So on balance, I still think it was a misplay and I probably should have played the Adarka Waste last turn. Opponent does have Corpse Appraiser and they can copy it. I did set stops during the opponent's turn just so we represent having something here, but I don't think it should really matter here. Right, we can ultimate the Teferi and we have Divine Purge as well. So, and yeah, I assume the opponent attacks Teferi with the token Corpse Appraiser and we can just trade with the 3/3. So at that point, Divine Purge basically is one-sided, right? It doesn't hit any of our own creatures. So opponent does attack Teferi with the Corpse Appraiser token. We'll obviously take the trade here. And then even though we have this Chandra emblem ticking up, we should be able to close the game up pretty quickly at this point, I think. You know, we can go for the Teferi ultimate. So interestingly, I choose to exile the Reflection here rather than using Divine Purge, which I'm not 100% sure why I did that. I guess, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I was just wondering, you know, what I wanted to hold the Divine Purge in case they play Crucius potentially, or I didn't want them to be replaying stuff from the exile. But if I was planning to just use Kaleem this turn, I think it probably would have made more sense. I don't know. Actually, yeah, I guess if we use the -2 on the Reflection, then Kaleem at least has a target this turn, and then we can go Kaleem, tap down the Appraiser, exile the Den of the Bugbear. So yeah, I don't mind that line now, actually thinking about it a little bit more. And if they do commit more creatures to the board here, we have the Purge backup. So yeah, thinking about it, I do actually like that line that I took. I just couldn't remember at the time why I went for it. And yeah, opponent just scoops it up. So yeah, we managed to get there. Nice. That matchup felt pretty good overall from when I faced it so far. Okay, so feeling pretty good going into round 5 at 4-0. Feel pretty good about all my matchups so far. On the draw with this hand, though, definitely have to mulligan, which is a slight concern if we're against a Thoughtseize deck. And then going to put back an island. Definitely happy to keep this. I mean, obviously there's going to be some matchups where Purge isn't great, but opponent leads on Soulscar Mage, so almost certainly going to be against Izzet Wizards here. So pretty happy with the double Divine Purge here, I think. Very much doubt they're going to be running Spell Pierce in the main deck, so, you know, particularly while Control isn't that on people's radar right now. So opponent leads on Consider here. I ended up shocking the Hallowed Fountain, even though we are running multiple Hall of Storm Giants, just because this is a matchup where the life total is super relevant, and, you know, getting an opportunity to get Hallowed Fountain into play without having to pay 2 is a pretty big deal. So opponent does get second Soulscar Mage in here, and I feel it's really important right now to represent interaction, right? If I just skip straight through my phases, opponent can just jam, like, you know, Consider into double Wizard's Lightning and put me down super low, whereas at least if we represent some interaction here, they're probably more likely to hold back a little bit this turn, hopefully. They still lead on Consider, which, you know, does mean they're representing 4 damage straight away, but I'm basically trying to do my best to make it obvious to the opponent that I could have something here, so they're more likely to just spend their turn playing another creature so that we can get max value off the Divine Purge here. And they do that, so that's perfect, right? They play the Arcanist out. Now we can just jam the Divine Purge and we get really good value here. We've got the second, we got 2 more Divine Purges and Teferi, so I'm actually feeling pretty good about this spot. Right, the opponent's not going to be able to win without creatures, and we have answers to creatures for days with this hand. So even though using a Purge on a single Soulscar Mage isn't the best, you know, I do want to be able to cast a Teferi next turn, and with the third one in hand, I feel like it's best to just snap it off there. And then we can potentially just go to Teferi minus. Ideally, if we draw like a Soul Partition or a Kaleem, we could go to Teferi plus, which would be sick. Now, unfortunately, we don't, and they play Den of the Bugbear, which is a little bit annoying, so I can't exactly remember what I do here. I think that we're kind of incentivized to minus here, because if they don't have the 5th land here, then there's a chance Teferi survives unless they have a Wizard's Lightning. And putting Soulscar Mage back in the deck, you know, it gets one of the creatures off the board, which is, you know, keeping the opponent's creatures off the board is the key in this matchup from my experience. And when they do redraw that Soulscar Mage, it keeps the Divine Purge tax. So they're still going to have to pay 3 mana for it. They're still going to have to play it tapped. So it's kind of like a bad draw that we've put back in their deck for them. Now, they did have the Strangle. They didn't have the land for the Den of the Bugbear, but that's fine. You know, we don't have that much top end, but we do have Hall of Storm Giants and Castle Vantress here. We have the answer to the Den of the Bugbear as well. Opponent does flash in Snapcaster Mage, which is a little bit annoying because, you know, we do have the Divine Purge here for it, obviously, but using Divine Purge on Snapcaster is a lot worse because if the game does go very long, it then enables them to snap in for 4 mana to then, you know, flash back a spell as well. But yeah, I still feel like, you know, we've played this game quite well so far and we're in a reasonable position. Obviously, the opponent does have access to quite a lot of creatures off the Divine Purge, but, you know, the Purge tax stacks. So, you know, if they do play more creatures, like if they do play the Arcanist from Exile, then you know, we can purge again, tax them even further. So they do have an expressive iteration, and thankfully the Symmetry Sage buff only increases Snapcaster Mage's power by 1 here, so we don't have to worry about that. Unfortunately, we're 1 mana short of being able to activate Horde of Storm Giants to prevent them from attacking here, but I think that's fine. Now, we do have an interesting spot here where if they don't play anything else, we can either Field of Ruin the Den of the Bugbear now, or we can Castle Vantress to try and find something better, which I think is a really close deal. Like, obviously, Castle Vantress uses our mana a lot better. I mean, we'll have to wait and see if they, you know, do play anything else. I don't think they do, though. I think they just play Wizard's Lightning and pass back here. So we can Field of Ruin, get rid of the Den of the Bugbear, but the nice thing about Castle Vantress is not only does it use our mana more efficiently, but it also hopefully digs us towards something so that we can go purge and have something else up here. And we do find a Wandering Emperor, which is great. So obviously scry that to the top. And then I think we're basically forced to go for purge here. Unfortunately, we don't have enough white to go for purge and Emperor in the same turn. So maybe I was supposed to play a Darker Wastes earlier. I think that was a misplay on my part. I should have probably played a Darker Wastes instead of maybe the Field of Ruin. Obviously, the castle was important at helping us find the Wandering Emperor, so that was important to run out. But yeah, I mean, although having said that, I think Field of Ruin is important to get into play to stop them attacking us with the Den of the Bugbear, especially when we're at 8. So we Field of Ruin the Den of the Bugbear here, you know, because we don't have enough mana to go for the castle, and I think it is important to get it out of play, just to deny them that option. The annoying thing here is it does give them an extra mana, so you know, if they do have a 2 mana instant, this gives them access to be able to cast it. And then Archmage's Charm is pretty sick. So I think it's best to just jam the Wandering Emperor now, because if we let them untap and wait for them to attack with the Arcanist, they do get a trigger, right? They get to cast something from the graveyard with the Arcanist. So I think going for main phase did make sense here, right? We get to exile the Arcanist before they get a trigger off it. Opponent's obviously in the tank, so I assume they must have some kind of burn spell here. But I'm very happy to take that trade, right? We're at 8, so that's, you know, not only three burn that went on the Wandering Emperor instead of us, but we also got to kill the Arcanist and go up to 10 as well. So very, very happy with that exchange so far. So then opponent goes Consider. So even though the opponent does have a lot of creatures in exile off the purge, I'm still pretty happy about this spot, right? We can potentially use Charm to draw 2 to try and find more gas. We can potentially use it to steal one of their creatures if they just play a 1-drop. Or we can obviously use it to counter, you know, something problematic that we want to be able to stop. So I think I can't quite remember what happens here, actually. I know, I think they go for, well, we'll see in a second, but I think they go for Soulscar Mage, which is not one I'm interested in countering, right? If we're going to use Archmage's Charm, we're going to use it to steal the Soulscar Mage. And then they go for Mentor's Guidance. So definitely going to steal the Soulscar Mage here, because not only does that deal with the Soulscar Mage and give it to us, but it also denies them the second copy of Mentor's Guidance, which is huge. So that was a really big turn for us, I think. You know, we denied them an extra draw. Although having said that, they did find a Den of the Bugbear as well. So this is the turn where I make like 4 mistakes in one. So not only do I fire up, I thought I had enough mana to attack with Haul and Hold Up Change the equation. Now I'm like tilted and realize that I miscounted. So I played that way too quickly. And then I also made the mistake of committing to the play, even though it was probably incorrect, right? What I should have done there is fire up, well, I shouldn't have fired up Haul. I should have just played slower to realize that I didn't have enough mana. Once I activated Haul, I should have realized, okay, I've made a mistake. I need to mitigate that and not attack with the Haul so that I have 2 mana for Change the Equation, because that play basically, I think, lost me this game. We'll have to see, but yeah. So they now bounce their own Soulscar Mage. If we had changed the equation, we could counter that, so that not only would they not have this Brazen Borrower, but we would still have access to their Soulscar Mage. So not only I shouldn't have attacked, I shouldn't have fired up the Haul. Once I did fire up the Haul, I should have realized that that was a mistake, and I should have held the mana open. So yeah, I at this point I was just kind of tilted, and now I'm counting up my mana and being careful with it, right? So we could. Well, I don't think we have enough mana. I know we did have enough mana to hardcast the Kaleem and Hold Up Change the equation, which probably would have been better, actually. So I think at this point I was still on tilt from the mistake on the previous turn. I think I was supposed to just hardcast Kaleem there. So, because we could have still, you know, used Change the equation here to counter the Symmetry Sage. And you know, I think my thought was that I need to deny them the Dreadwood Arcanist trigger, but yeah. So I've made 2 or 3 pretty big mistakes here over the course of a couple of turns. Now they go for Mentor's Guidance, so they get to draw more. So yeah, at least getting the Kaleem into play here would have just stopped them attacking, which is the most important thing. Instead, I cycled the Dreadwood Arcanist. I guess I was trying to find a Wandering Emperor to exile the Arcanist so that we deny them the second copy of the Mentor's Guidance. Now I'm setting stops during the opponent's turn just so they don't know that we don't have anything off the draw. But yeah, these 2 turns here were just kind of like a disaster, right? And I think this should be a lesson, right? This is a lesson I've learned that I thought I'd learned this in the past, but I fell into the trap again of doing it here. Is that if you make a mistake, don't worry about realizing it and not following through on the play. Like their last turn or whenever it was, I should have just realized I messed up my counting on the mana and not attacked with the Hall. I should have just, passed back, because the only difference there between firing up the Hall and not firing up the Hall is that I don't have mana available to what am I saying? Yeah, I don't have mana available to scry with Castle Vantress. That would have been the only difference there. So it would have actually been not too bad if I'd just gone, okay, I've messed up there, just going to pass back, not attack with the Hall. So yeah, definitely going to remember to not do that in future. And then again, I should have hardcasted Kaleem last turn as well. So basically through this game, which was pretty annoying for sure. But, it's a good learning point for me. That really hammered home the fact that if you do make a mistake, don't be worried about walking it back, right? Don't follow through just to not look foolish or whatever. So here they have a Balmor, and I think we just have to fire off Kaleem now in order to try and find a way to stop this Balmor, because if they have Balmor into spell, we're basically just dead on board. So we hit another farmland, so definitely going to cycle again, just trying to find a counter spell here, basically. And we did find one, which is kind of lucky, but again, I think we're just too far behind at this point. Again, if I hadn't still been tilted the following turn, I should have just hard cast the Kaleem. I would have had a big blocker in play. It would have been really hard for them to have good attacks. We would have probably been still at 10 because they can't really afford to attack in with the Brazen Borrower. So yeah, this was definitely a match that I played really badly in. I think I was playing well until that turn with the Hall of Storm Giants activation. It just completely threw me. I just played too quickly and didn't count up. But yeah, it is what it is. Good learning experience. So they fire off 2 Considers here. And now at this point, even if we find sweepers, I mean, we're going down to 5 here. They've got an active... Well, I guess we've got Field of Ruin, right? So if we can find a Divine Purge, we have a chance at least. Now, I'm thinking about setting a stop during the upkeep for Castle Vantress, but I think we need to hold open Field of Ruin, and so in order to have enough mana to go Field of Ruin and a sweeper, we just have to take the draw step here and hope we get a good draw. And we do find an Archmage's Charm, but we can steal the Soulscar Mage, or, my thought was if I use the draw to an Archmage's Charm now, I can both tap something down and potentially draw into a sweeper here. So, again, I think I could have potentially gone Kaleem to dig for a Divine Purge here, which is probably the better line. Now, that does mean that they have access to Den of the Bugbear to put us down to 1, but yeah, I think that was probably the slightly better line at this point as well. So, again, I think I could have played to my outs slightly better in this possession, but yeah, I think we lost this game over the course of those 2 turns by, not holding up Change the Equation and then not hardcasting Kaleem the following turn. Now, even if we draw well, I think we're playing too far behind, right? Even if we hit a Divine Purge, they have so much mana now that they can just start recasting stuff. They even have enough mana here to flashback Snapcaster Mage and, cast a Wizard's Lightning from their graveyard as well. So I don't even know what we're looking for off the Kaleem here, right? If we find a Wandering Emperor, that's not the worst, but they can, fire up Den of the Bugbear. So they have a Wizard's Lightning, and now, even if we find a Wandering Emperor, we're basically dead here. So definitely through this game, which is also pretty annoying as well because I think this is a pretty good matchup for our build, right? I found Wizards to be pretty good so far, and I think that is probably a matchup where we're likely to win had I not made those few mistakes. So definitely want Supreme Verdict and Mystical Dispute here. Definitely can trim on Memory Deluge. And then this is another spot where I think I've probably slightly mis-sideboarded as well, if I remember correctly. So I think since I start trimming some stuff, I trim lands as well, which I'm not sure is correct. I think because we don't actually really change the curve of the deck with how I sideboard, right? We go slightly down on 4 drops. I guess maybe it is alright to go down to 29 lands here, actually. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, either way, definitely played that game 1 pretty badly after that Horde of Storm Giants. So I think, looking back on it now, this is the first time I'm rewatching the game since then. I think I was actually quite likely to win that if I just pass with Change the Equation up and then I hardcast Kaleem the following turn. I think I've got a much, much better chance because it's really hard for them to attack. We would still probably have the Soulscar Mage. They wouldn't have access to the Brazen Borrower, so yeah, I think the wheels kind of fell off after I got tilted that game, unfortunately. Either way, I think we can keep this, right? We've got a lot of interaction in the early game. Keeping their creatures off the board is the way to win this one, so pretty happy with the keep. We do draw Soul Partition off the top, and they do have Bankbuster, which is an interesting card. But yeah, we definitely go for Soul Partition. And then, unfortunately, we miss a land drop here, which is, kind of tilting. So I think this is the first time ever sideboarding with this deck where I go below 30 lands. And it's just bad variance, right? I know from the numbers that even with a 29 land deck, you're very, very likely to hit your 3rd land on curve, but then again, we miss another land drop, so yeah, this is not looking good. And again, I'm getting even more kind of tilted now after that first game because, chances of missing the 3rd land drop, even in a 29 land deck, are pretty low. And then, like I said, it's kind of ironic. The only time I ever go below 30 lands, I end up missing the 3rd land. But having said that, I think we've still got a chance here if we do draw the 3rd land now. We are obviously a little bit behind, but, with 2 Purge, 2 Verdicts, and the Archmage's Charm, it's not actually the worst in the world, right? If they're not really committing too hard to the board here. We could potentially use Archmage's Charm to steal the Soulscar Mage. Although, having said that, I think them developing to the board slowly probably means they have some amount of counter spells. It's post-sideboard, they're going to have Spell Pierce and stuff like that. And then we miss land drop again. So, yeah, I think this was, after the game 1 loss is just a bit annoying. The other tilting thing about this is that, had I played well and we managed to win game 1, even if this had happened game 2, going into game 3 on the play, we have a much better chance on top of that. So we're basically forced to use Change the Equation to counter the Wizard's Lightning here. First of all, so that we don't discard to hand size if we do miss a land drop, which we do again. But also just because we need to mitigate damage here, right? We're super far behind on tempo because we do miss land drops. And the other annoying thing here is that the opponent is just keeping mana open now during their turn, so I'm pretty confident they have counter spells of their own. So even if we do find the 3rd land and go for a Purge here, which we do, I'm pretty confident they... Well, actually, I forgot that it was also a tap land here, but yeah. I'm pretty confident at this point because the opponent is playing very reactively. They must have some amount of counter spells in hand. So, again, setting stops during the opponent's turn just to represent more interaction here. But, yeah, it just wasn't meant to be this game, I don't think. But yeah, like I said, it was definitely my fault because if I played game 1 better, I would, potentially... if this had happened game 2, going into game 3 on the play, I think we're actually pretty favoured there. So yeah, they do have the Spell Pierce, so do end up picking up the first loss here, and I think it was pretty avoidable, which was the most tilting thing. Okay, so going into round 6 here on the play, which is great, and this hand was also really nice, right? A little bit awkward we don't have the 3rd blue for Archmage's Charm yet, but on the play, this is definitely a keep. We've got early interaction, we've got the Archmage's Charm. If we do hit the 3rd blue, then we've got Deluge into Fairy. And like I said, 30 land deck, we're very likely to keep hitting land drops, which we do. So opponent leads on Watery Grave, and we're against the Gigantha deck. So not 100% sure what we were up against at this point, but I set stops during the opponent's turn just to represent Change the Equation or Soul Partition. The opponent also plays... Overgrown Tomb. So at this point, I'm thinking more likely to be Kethis because we haven't seen any Triomes, which I'm more hopeful that it's Kethis than Domain. Kethis is a much easier matchup for us. I mean, Domain still felt like a good matchup, but it's a lot trickier to navigate. So they go for Emery here, and I'm thinking I'm probably just going to Archmage's Charm this, right? We still have Soul Partition in case they go for Kethis, and, you know, we could Soul Partition the Emery, but it gets discounted by their artifacts anyway, so it's going to be very easy for them to just recast it for, you know, even with the Soul Partition tax on. So pass it back here, and obviously we've got Deluge open. We've also potentially got Kaleem and Soul Partition as well. You know, Kaleem, I don't really feel is going to get that much value. I mean, we do have Teferi, so tapping attackers down is obviously going to be important, but... So they go for Relic of Legends, which I'm happy to let resolve, right? I'm not too concerned about that, you know, especially when we've got Divine Purge in hand. Okay, and they do go for Emery as well. So I think here I'm just going to be interested in going for Deluge, because Divine Purge is going to hit them pretty hard here, right? Not only does it hit the Emery, but it also hits the Mox Amber and the Relic. So we're mainly just looking for lands at this point. So definitely want the Hallowed Fountain. And then I think I also want to go for the Field of Ruin, because Kethis typically doesn't run any basics from the lists I've seen. So definitely going to go for the Purge here just to slow them down, right? Hitting the Mox Amber is really sick here as well, because that basically stops them from comboing with that Mox Amber with Kethis, because even though it gets reduced by the Kethis, it still costs them 1 mana, so they're not gaining any mana from it. So that's really sick. And then we've obviously got Teferi here as well. They do go for Jace, which is a little bit annoying because, you know, that's the permanent... Well, I guess we have Soul Partition to be able to deal with it, but I think we would rather save Soul Partition for Kethis here, because they do have stuff in the graveyard. They do have the potential to just go off here. So they do -2 rather than going for the -X, which I guess makes sense because they can potentially get 2 activations here. Going to cycle the Kaleem just to draw, you know, get the Kaleems rolling so I can hopefully get one in play relatively soon. And then I draw another Soul Partition off the top here. So I was originally going to go Teferi Tuck the Jace, but I think I prefer now going for Teferi plus and then use Soul Partition on the Jace. And again, the opponent, I'm not worried about the opponent going off at this point, right? We don't need Soul Partition for Kethis this turn because they don't have that much stuff in the graveyard yet, or that much important stuff in the graveyard. So, you know, they have got 1 Mox Amber, but that's not good enough to combo off. So I think we can afford to take a single turn off from holding open Soul Partition for Kethis. If they want to take their entire turn replaying the Jace, we can just minus the Jace with the Teferi here and then still have Soul Partition up for Kethis. And we can also start potentially going after their lands with Field of Ruin as well. Now, they have been hitting, obviously, you know, they've been hitting a lot of land drops here, so I'm not sure how useful that is, but if we have mana spare, it's just something good to do. So interesting that they went for the Relic of Legends at that point. Either way, we obviously lead with the Teferi Plus here. Not going to be activating Field of Ruin twice, and we could potentially go Field of Ruin to make use of our Teferi mana, but I choose to go for Wandering Emperor instead. Looking back on it now, I'm not sure that was correct. I think it probably would have been better to use Field of Ruin main phase and then Wandering Emperor end of turn, just to give them less information and deny them mana, right? Because I'm probably going to be using Field of Ruin at the end of this turn anyway, so I think it would have been better to just do it main phase, so they have less mana going into their turn. So that was probably a slight misplay, but I don't think it's a huge one, right? Just a bit of a sequencing mistake, probably. So they do go for Emery, and they do hit another Mox Amber. So now we basically can't, you know, we need to hold open Soul Partition constantly now. So now, I guess we're not 100% sure if they were running basics at this point or not. Basically every Kethis deck that I've seen isn't running basics, so I think it's fairly safe to assume they weren't. And it turns out they weren't, from what I remember. Yeah, so Field of Ruins basically, you know, can be used as a Stone Rain. I mean, obviously it's better in the early game, but still useful now, right? Especially because they're a 4-color deck. Cutting them off certain colors is going to be very useful. Particularly because, I mean, they do have Chromatic Sphere, which does fix their mana somewhat here, but we can cut them off the Overgrown Tomb here with the Field of Ruin. So I chose to use the Wandering Emperor -2 on Emery, which I think is a good play, right? You know, they can just start getting value out of the graveyard with it, and you know, we've already got the 2/2 token off the Wandering Emperor, so I think that was a pretty decent line there. Then we can start applying pressure with the 2/2, and then to make use of the mana, I think I just go for Field of Ruin on the Overgrown Tomb, cut them off mana a little bit. Now, it doesn't cut them off green entirely because, You know, like I said, they've got those chromatic spheres there, which is good at fixing their mana, but after they've used those chromatic spheres, if they don't find another green land, that's gonna... I guess they've got Relic as well, so we're not really cutting them off colours at this point, really. We're just reducing the amount of mana they have access to, which is pretty big, right? Because they've still got the Jason Exile. They do need a certain amount of mana to be able to combo off, but at this point, right, we've got 2 Soul Partitions for Kethis. We've got Change the Equation as well. And I think changing the equation on Kinnan makes a lot of sense here, because if we resolve it, even if we immediately Soul Partition, they can produce a ton of mana off the Mox Amber and the Chromatic Spheres, and we're getting closer to the Fairy Ultimate, so opponent just scoops it up. So sideboarding here, definitely want the Rest in Peace. Whenever I bring in Rest in Peace, I cut the Kaleem, and then when I cut the Kaleem, I usually just bring in Shark Typhoon as a replacement. But in this matchup, I do feel like Verdict is probably more useful than Shark Typhoon, because, you know, they can't really do much when their creatures aren't on the board. They can build up a board state if they do have a very creature-heavy hand. You know, they often end up with board states where they have, like, Rona, Kinnan, Emery, and being able to Supreme Verdict that seems pretty good. So I think I prefer how I sideboarded here, right? There is maybe an argument to bringing in the Shark Typhoon as just, you know, a card that you can hold up alongside your counter spells to get you value. But I think, you know, the Supreme Verdict is pretty nice, especially if they end up in a spot where they also cast Gigantha as well, because obviously one of the downsides of Divine Purge here is that it doesn't hit Gigantha, but, you know, Purge is still nuts in this matchup. It hits basically all of their creatures and their Mox Ambers, their Relic of Legends. So, but yeah, overall this matchup's felt really good in testing so far. So definitely happy to keep this one. Right, having changed the equation on turn 2 is pretty sick. I mean, it doesn't stop their 2-drops on, like, because they're going to have their turn 2 before me, but it will be able to counter Kethis, which is very important when you're going second. So I think opponent's mulled to 6 so far, considering going down to 5, I think. Yeah, so they're on a mull to 6, which is obviously good for us. So we led on the farmland, which makes sense. And wow, I completely forgot about this. Yeah, opponent misses their second land drop, so they must have kept a really sketchy hand to do that. I mean, maybe they have, you know, Mox Amber Kinnan, but the fact that their second land is a Crossroads and that has to enter tapped is kind of rough for them as well. I mean, they do get a Scry to hopefully draw for another land, but that was obviously, you know, a big deal for us. Slowing them down makes our counter spells a lot more live. So here, you know, I was tempted to go for the Archmage's Charm just so that we can represent double counter spell next turn, but I think holding on to Archmage's Charm is more important because Change the Equation can't hit Jace. And so if we use Archmage's Charm there and they play Jace, we can't counter it. So I think holding on to Archmage's Charm makes more sense. So they go for Mox Amber, maybe trying to bait out a counter spell, and then they go for Rona again, even though... Well, I was tempted to go for the Change the Equation so that we have Archmage's Charm in order to stop Jace, but considering I'm hoping to cast Teferi next turn, I think it makes more sense to hold on to Change the Equation. So now we can go to Teferi Plus and hold open both Change the Equation and Soul Partition. And we draw a Field of Ruin, which is obviously super rough for our opponent when they're missing land drops. I mean, obviously this is going to be quite a one-sided game because the opponent has such a slow start because of the lands, but from my experience, Kethis is a really good matchup, especially with 3 Rest in Peace. Right, they really struggle to beat that. So even though this is obviously going to be a bit of a one-sided one, I think this matchup is pretty good for us overall. So definitely going to counter the Killing because otherwise they immediately get access to 2 extra mana off the Mox Amber. And then I'm pretty sure I just go for Field of Ruin, take out their Dark Slick Shores here, put them back down to 2 lands. And then we got Soul Partition, we got Memory Deluge. So yeah, opponent just keeps up. So that was obviously a rough game too there, but the matchup overall has felt really good from the control side. Okay, so going into round 7, we're 5-1, so not too far away from day 2, but we do need to win the next 2 in a row to get there. And we were on the draw, which is obviously a little bit annoying, but you know, this deck is, you know, one of the other upsides of playing control is you are reasonably good at coming back from behind. So I think it's one of the decks that doesn't mind playing second the most compared to a lot of other decks, but you know, there's obviously a huge amount of advantage even with this deck being on the play. You know, getting your Change the Equations live for your opponent's 2 drops, getting your Archmage's Charm online for your opponent's 3 drops is a big deal. So it looks like opponents on either Rakdos or John Midrange, or potentially Mardu, I guess, from what we've seen so far. And already at an interesting point here, whether we want to go for Hall so that we, don't miss out on tap lands, or whether we want to go for Glacial Fortress to enable Divine Purge. I end up going for the Hall here just because with Change the Equation, I think my logic was that if they play a creature like a Crucius or a Jarsil or a Seasoned Pyromancer, we're going to be countering it with Change the Equation, so we probably won't want to be using Divine Purge next turn anyway, right? We're probably going to snap counter this turn and then, snap counter something with Archmage's Charm next turn, potentially, and then, we've got Divine Purge available for the following turn if we need it. So I think the land sequencing was correct there, from what we had in our hand anyway. So opponent has Harvester here, which, we can afford to keep taking 3. We're not too worried about the damage from that alone. And I think, unless the opponent plays like a single discard spell here or something, I think I was basically going to guarantee counter whatever they play here. So opponent plays Fable, which we just snap off an Archmage's Charm on. And I feel pretty good about this spot. I mean, obviously we are taking damage from the Harvester, and that Hive of the Eye Tyrant over there is also a bit of a concern for sure. I'd feel a lot more confident if I had a Field of Ruin in this spot, but if we're just taking 3 a turn, if we can keep them off the board and keep drawing, we're probably going to go over the top of them. So I don't feel too bad about this spot. Opponent goes for Reckon and Bankbuster, and this is an interesting spot here where, because of the Divine Purge here, I think I'm happy to just let them have that and then Divine Purge next turn. Now, the downside of going for that is that that doesn't mean that we don't have a counter spell up for a single turn, right? If we do go Purge next turn, then we've only got 2 mana available. We do cycle Kaleem, though, targeting the Bankbuster to basically force them to activate that now if they want to draw, which they do. It's a little bit annoying. I was kind of hoping that they would hold up interaction, but thankfully we do draw a 2 mana spell, which is quite relevant because now we can go for the Divine Purge and we would have still had, Soul Partition up here for whatever the opponent has. So even if they do jam, as long as it's not an Invoke Despair or a Planeswalker, Soul Partition should be good to answer it. It was a little bit annoying they had the Inquisition because now that can take the Archmage's Charm, which means that we're out of counter spells. But I mean, thankfully Wandering Emperor Soul Partition is still pretty decent here. But losing counter spells is pretty costly in this sort of matchup, as you'll see a little bit later. So yeah, I think at this point the opponent's just considering what they're going to run out for the second spell of the turn. And I think no matter what it is, we're probably incentivized to Soul Partition it just to keep it off the board, because I would really like to save this Wandering Emperor for the Hive of Eye Tyrants if possible. So Fable is probably the most annoying thing here because we can't cleanly answer it with the Soul Partition, but I think we're basically forced to snap it off on the 2/2 there because, there is maybe an argument to using Soul Partition on the Fable instead to deny them the draw, but the issue with doing that is that they can then cast it later in the game, right? The big advantage of using Partition on a token is that it's as good as a proper removal spell, or like a permanent removal spell. So now this is the turn where I really wish I had a counter. So I led on cycling the farmland here to try and dig for one. Fortunately, they have the Crucius, and then this is the real turning point in the game, I think. Opponent also had a Seasoned Pyromancer, so this is when they really start pulling ahead on terms of card advantage at the very least, and let them Crucius activate first just so they have less information, but I'm pretty sure I flashed in the Emperor here just to get some more board presence, stop them attacking freely with what they've got in play. So opponent obviously in the tank here about what they're going to use with Crucius, which isn't a good sign for me. Maybe it is. It either means they've got 2 really good cards or 2 really bad cards. So just got to hope it's the latter. I can't actually remember what they discard here. Be interesting to see. Because if it is a good card, we're obviously in a really bad spot. Just keeping an eye on the timer there as well. Okay, so yeah, Bloodtithe Harvester, so I assume must have meant they had good cards. And they pick Ambitious, so we know they've got gas in hand now as well, for sure. So we make a 2/2. Unfortunately, we draw another land, which isn't ideal, but we do have a Field of Ruin here, which is pretty useful. And the other nice thing is that not only do we have Field of Ruin, but we also have mana available to animate Hall of Storm Giants. So if they do choose to attack, we can obviously fire that up as a big blocker. But the issue here is we don't have any removal outside of Emperor, which isn't really live as removal, and then the opponent can obviously start copying the Seasoned Pyromancer, which is really bad for us, right? If they can empty their hand and just keep drawing 2 off Pyromancer every turn, that's really rough. And then they also have Shieldred here, so obviously a very rough spot for us for sure. And the other annoying thing is that we can't even use our mana very effectively here, because since they have 2 hives, we basically have to hold on to the Field of Ruin for them to fire it up. Because if we kill one of the hives, they just use the other one. If we kill Castle Lochthwain, then we're very vulnerable to them attacking with the hive. And since we're down at 9, I don't think we can really afford to do that preemptively. We do draw another Wandering Emperor, which is pretty nice though. So we now have 3 blockers in play, and we can potentially exile the Shieldred, but the issue here is they can just start copying the Seasoned Pyromancer, and we don't have a good way to stop that at all. Interestingly, they go for the Bloodtithe Harvester, and they try and copy it here, though, which does enable us to flash in the Emperor. Now, I was pretty set on using the Emperor to try and exile the Shieldred, but I feel like this slows them down enough that it's worth going for, right? We get to exile the Bloodtithe Harvester, deny them the Reflection trigger for the turn, gain 2 life, get rid of the Harvester so they don't have it as an option for the Reflection. So even though in an ideal world I'd have used the Wandering Emperor to exile the Shieldred, because that is still a big issue here, I'm still pretty happy with that exchange. And we've got a Kaleem on top as well, so then they attack with the Pyromancer, which I'm kind of surprised about, because the main thing I'm worried about at this point, I mean obviously Shieldred is a concern for sure, but I'm mainly worried about them copying the Seasoned Pyromancer with the Reflection. And so I'm very happy to snap off a block here. Now, having said that, I think I did misplay there. I probably should have double blocked the Seasoned Pyromancer in case they had Fatal Push, right? If I just single block like I did there and they Fatal Push the token, then they can still copy the Seasoned Pyromancer. So I think I should have double blocked there for sure. But I mean, either way, I think those last 2 exchanges were good for us, but we're still pretty far behind here, right? We need to find a sweeper of some sort. Divine Purge doesn't deal with the Shieldred, which is a bit annoying, although we do have the Hall of Storm Giants, so I make a 2-2 token here, which I think makes the most sense, right? There's not really much point in turning the 2-2 into a 3-3, but they still have, this is game 1, they're still going to have access to Fatal Push here to deal with our tokens as well. And we do still have the Hall of Storm Giants as a blocker for the Shieldred, which is pretty nice. We could have also potentially hardcast the Kaleem, which is a line that I didn't really consider at the time, but could be pretty reasonable. I mean, again, it's game 1. They do still have access to their creature removal, but you would need like a Heartless Act or a Go for the Throat to deal with that. So maybe that was better, because I think what I end up doing here is tapping down the Shieldred, which I'm not sure is that great, really, because it deals us 2 off the Shieldred trigger anyway. Maybe we're better off firing off the Hall of Storm Giants to block. Actually, I'm thinking about it, I don't know. This is a close line. I remember pondering it at the time. I think it probably is better to wait for them to attack. Potentially fire up the Hall. Although if they have Fatal Push, we just get destroyed by that. I think that was my logic at the time. And we did draw into a Soul Partition, which is pretty sick. But yeah, actually thinking about it, I think firing up the Hall there is really risky because of Fatal Push. So here they attack. Again, I can't really afford to play around Fatal Push. So maybe it's best to, I don't know. I feel like if they had Fatal Push, they probably would have used it there. So maybe we're too far behind that we're supposed to fire up the Hall anyway, right? And just take the trade with the Shieldred if they attack. So yeah, looking back on this now, I think I probably would have been better off not using the Kaleem there, waiting for them to attack, because I can't really afford to play around Fatal Push regardless, I don't think. I'm too far behind. So yeah, that was a slight misplay, but they did have the second Shieldred, so we're still very far behind at this point. I mean, again, we still have access to the Hall of Storm Giants, but they then have access to the Hive of the Eye Tyrant, and we don't have enough mana here, particularly because we drew a Hallowed Fountain. We don't have enough mana here to activate a Field of Ruin and Hall of Storm Giants. We can't shock in the Hallowed Fountain because we're just dead to the next Shieldred trigger, so bit of a rough game. I think, like I said, the turning point was that Seasoned Pyromancer. That sequence of Inquisition away the Archmage's Charm into Crucius plus Seasoned Pyromancer. But yeah, maybe things have been different if I hadn't used the Kaleem, right? We would have been 2 damage better off. I assume they didn't have Fatal Push, or they would have used it last turn, and we could have just fired up the Hall. So I think that Kaleem line might have... Again, like, we're still pretty far behind, even if we do trade the Hall of Storm Giants with the Shieldred, but maybe we would have had more of a chance to win this one. And again, we wouldn't have been dead to the Shieldred draw triggers, so looking back on it, I think it probably would have been correct to just let them attack rather than using Kaleem. They don't attack with the Hive, which is almost certainly a mistake from the opponent. So that does give us the opportunity to make the trade here, but they still have that second Shieldred in exile that they can cast, so... But, you know, it gives us an out here, right? We can potentially draw something, but then they have another Seasoned Pyromancer, so... Bit of an awkward game where there were probably more edges to be had in a few different spots, but I don't know if I'd have won anyway. I mean, we did draw another Memory Deluge, so... And if we had traded with that Shieldred on board, that was the Shieldred that we exiled with the Soul Partition that they just recast, so... I mean, either way, we didn't hit well enough off the Memory Deluge here to survive, but yeah, I mean, from how things panned out, had we gone for animating the Hall instead of activating Kaleem, we probably have a reasonable chance here, maybe? Hard to say. Because, you know, they did have pretty good sequences every single turn, so... And there's also a chance they just don't attack, right? The upside of going for the Kaleem play that I did is that if we draw into something like a Wandering Emperor, we can just get rid of the Shieldred, whereas they could very easily just sit on their board state and just deal us damage off the Shieldred every single turn, so... End up losing game one here, which is a bit annoying. I mean, they do respect Settle the Wreckage, so if we had Wandering Emperor here, we would have survived. So I do feel like the opponent probably misplayed a couple of times there, but they were so far ahead that it probably didn't end up mattering. But yeah, looking back on it now, that Kaleem Horde of Storm Giants turn didn't seem that decisive at the time, but looking back on it, I think that could have made a difference. I mean, again, like I said, they might have just not attacked with the Shieldred. They could have just sat on it, so that would have kind of just wasted my turn a little bit. So if the opponent did play that turn well, then we're probably losing that game anyway. It's an interesting game for sure. I think that was probably the big turning point, though, that Hall of Storm Giants Kaleem turn. But either way, you know, going into game two, I'm pretty confident with my sideboarding in general in this matchup, right? The main deck is basically pre-sideboarded against the mid-range decks, so overall feels pretty good. I mean, having said that, I think the mid-range decks that are the worst for us are this style of low-to-the-ground Rakdos, where they don't ever really have mana issues, where they load up on a bunch of discard spells. They're probably running 4 Inquisition, 4 Thoughtseize. They can sideboard into more cheap creatures. Shieldred closes the game out a lot quicker. I think one of the main reasons why I was particularly excited to play Control this weekend was because the mid-range decks in general were getting bigger and bigger to try and go over the top of each other. And generally, the bigger the mid-range deck gets, the easier the matchup is for the Control side. I mean, I'm not saying this matchup is... unwinnable against these lower to the ground Rakdos mid-range decks. In fact, I think I have a pretty positive win rate against this specific style of deck as well, but it's definitely the one where it's not a foregone conclusion, right? This is the sort of low to the ground deck where if their discard spells line up well against us and we don't draw particularly well, they can just fairly easily win because they do close the game out quicker, which is the big difference maker. Either way, I'm pretty happy with this hand, as long as we can keep drawing land drops, which, you know, this is the main reason why I run so many lands, so that you can confidently keep these sorts of hands, and you're very likely to keep drawing lands. So opponent leads on Thoughtseize here, and I assume at the time I assumed they would snap off Change the Equation, but I think they take Teferi here, which was a surprise to me, because I felt like... I just felt like Change the Equation, stopping their proactive plays is going to make a really big deal. But obviously they didn't. That made me think they must have a slow hand that they were worried about Teferi. Although they did follow up with Inquisition, so I guess that was, Inquisition is trying to take the Change the Equation here. So I was kind of tempted to fire off Change the Equation here, but I kind of want to keep Change the Equation, right? I want them to take Divine Purge, so that I get to keep Change the Equation with this hand. So even though we do lose, the downside of not using change the equation here is that we give them extra information, because they can take the change the equation and then they just find out what the last card in our hand is. But I think I would rather give them the information of one card and risk them taking the Divine Purge, because, you know, they might have a creature heavy hand with like Seasoned Pyromancers and stuff and see the Divine Purge as more of a threat. And I'd rather give them the opportunity to take that than, you know, concede that I have conceal that I have the Adarka Waste, if that makes sense. They do unfortunately take the change the equation though, and we don't draw the fourth land, which is a little bit annoying. You know, this is again one of the main reasons why I really wanted to be running a high land deck, so that in situations like this you are pretty likely to find that fourth land, because if we can find the fourth land, the opponent has been slow to develop to the board. So using Deluge to find more stuff, or using Wandering Emperor, is going to be a big deal. And thankfully we did hit it. You know, this is one of the big reasons why I like a lot of lands. Opponent does have an active Crucius in play though, which is a bit annoying. We could have used Divine Purge to cut them off mana and the Crucius, but, you know, particularly because they have Shieldred and we weren't guaranteed to be hitting land drops here, I would rather have Deluge to, you know, open up the possibility of us digging for stuff. So again, opponent Thought Seizes, and we could have flashed in Wandering Emperor in response, but I would prefer to keep Divine Purge, right? I'm very happy for them to take Wandering Emperor, and then I can go Deluge, try and find the fifth land, and then purge away their whole board. So I'm going to give them the opportunity to not take the Purge here. Unfortunately, again, they made the right choice. They take the Divine Purge. But I think they don't attack here, which is obviously good for us, right? They know we have the Emperor, so that then enables us to go for the Deluge, slows down the opponent's ability to pressure us. So even though we have lost 2 key cards and changed the equation in Divine Purge, I don't mind our position here, right? We're still at 18. We're still developing. We're keeping up on mana. And then, obviously with Memory Deluge, we're basically just trying to find our fifth land plus something else good here. Ideally, a Divine Purge would be great. And we do find the land, and then I think we just want to go for the Archmage's Charm here because, you know, we've been wanting counter spells to keep, you know, just to stop stuff like Shieldred, or I don't know if they're running Invoke Despair or something like that. So having access to Archmage's Charm is going to be pretty big here. And they also, the other big thing I remember at the time was they discarded a Fable picking Grixis. So I know they have their top end card in hand, whether that's a Shieldred, whether that's an Invoke Despair. I know they have it. So they're attacking in here, which makes me think, okay, they're trying to make us play the Wandering Emperor so that they can then resolve whatever their 4-mana card is. You know, Shieldred, Cityscape Connoisseur, or whatever, a City Stalker Connoisseur. But I feel like because I know they have the top end card, I have to hold open Archmage's Charm here. And I remember there was a pause here. I think the opponent was thinking, okay, they didn't use Wandering Emperor here, so they must have a counter spell. So do I go to end step? Do I cast it? And I was also thinking, okay, should I set a stop and use one? If they do pass to the end step, I could then flash in Wandering Emperor before it goes to their end step, but then they get the opportunity to cast the Shieldred or the Invoke Despair, which would be a disaster. So my thoughts here is, if they go to the end step, I let them go to end step and then go Wandering Emperor. If I do Wandering Emperor before the end step, then it remains in their main phase 2 and they can still cast their Shieldred or Invoke Despair or whatever top end card it is. So I basically have to let them get the Crucius trigger, unfortunately. They do choose to do that, so they must have a read here that I do have a counter spell, or I imagine they would just jam whatever. They choose not to activate Crucius, which is good for us in a way, but is also kind of terrifying because it must mean that they just have gas in hand, and, you know, they don't want to get rid of anything. They're also stuck on 3 lands, so it's basically saying to me I don't want extra treasures as well. So not a good sign for us. I mean, they do go for Shieldred's Edict, which I'm pretty happy to see, right? That's a very good exchange for us. They didn't get the Crucius trigger, and we get to trade, you know, Wandering Emperor and a Shieldred's Edict. We get to trade Crucius and a Shieldred's Edict for Wandering Emperor, which is pretty sick. We draw a change the equation as well, which is nice. Now we have a cheap way to counter any bigger red spells. Like, I don't know what they would be running. I mean, all of the top end stuff that I'm worried about from Rakdos is black. So, but change the equation does come in handy here, right? They have Rack and a Bankbuster, which we can counter, which I think is important to stop because we are in kind of an attrition-based situation right now. If they can start pulling ahead on card advantage, that's obviously not good for us. And then they pass back, so we can just snap off Deluge. So I feel pretty good about this spot right now. And we hit a Divine Purge, which is pretty sick. So now we can go, you know, pick up a Purge and a land. Choose to go for an untapped one rather than a farmland because we have these 2 memory deluges in the graveyard that we might want to flash back. But with the opponent stuck on 3 lands, I feel like I want to go for Purge here just to deny them the lands, right? We know they have a card in hand that costs more than 3 because they went ambitious off the Crucius. And so going for Purge here basically means that if they don't draw land for the turn, they can't cast whatever they have. But they have a Razorlash Transmogrant, which is a real problem for me. And not only that, but they also have the black mana to be able to bring it back. So now that out of nowhere, you know, we've just tapped out for our sweeper, and now they have a 4 power creature in play, which I, you know, wasn't prepared for Transmogrant in deck building at all. This is not a card I've seen in Historic. I've seen it quite a lot in Alchemy recently, but yeah, I was not. I thought that turn would be a complete blowout in our favor, but now we're in real trouble. We're on a 2-turn clock out of nowhere. The opponent does find the 4th land, and it's a creature land, and they go for Liliana. So we're basically forced to use our Archmage's Charm now, and now we don't have an answer for whatever top end card they have. So that one turn that I thought would be a complete blowout for me with Divine Purge is just completely flipped on its head. I mean, thankfully they didn't have the 5th land for the Hive, right? If we were taking 7 this turn, we're just completely dead. They do have the Shielder though, so I assume that's the top end card that they got off the Crucius. So we need a good hit off the Deluge here, basically. And we do hit pretty well, right? We have Teferi, which we can use to tuck the Shieldred. We go down to 1. And we also have, I think I end up going for Divine Purge here. We have enough mana to go Teferi, tuck the Shieldred, and then Divine Purge the Transmogrant, which is huge because then, you know, it costs them a lot of mana to cast that Transmogrant again. And so now the game is basically coming down to whether the opponent top decks an untapped land here, right? Because if they do, they can just go fire up Hive, attack us, because we'll be at 1 off the Shieldred trigger. But if they don't, I think we've actually got a pretty good chance of coming back in this game, because Teferi will presumably survive. Then we've got, you know, we drew another Deluge for turn, so this whole game is basically just going to come down to whether the opponent can draw an untapped land off the top. So we go Teferi, minus the Shieldred, then we purge the Transmogrant here, and we do have the Field of Ruin as well. So if we do get to untap with Teferi, we have the answer for the Hive immediately. But unfortunately, the opponent does find the land off the top. So that's that game. It's a really interesting game for sure. And like, I honestly do feel, I mean, again, you know, we got 2-0'd, so no guarantee that we win the match if we win this game. But if they don't find that land there, I think we have actually got a really good shot of winning this one. So unfortunately, did end out at 5-2. Which a little bit disappointed with because I was really hoping to make day 2, but it's still a pretty respectable record overall. Just a little bit frustrating that I think, you know, that loss I'm not sure was avoidable. Sometimes matches against Rakdos are going to end like that, but the match against Wizards definitely did feel like I could have won that. But anyway, let's just have a look at the deck and do a little bit of an outro. So we ended up 5-2 overall, which, like I said, is pretty respectable. A little bit annoying that I didn't make day 2, especially because that match against Wizards, I feel like, was just misplays on my part. And, you know, if I do end up winning that game 1, even if we ended up getting mana screwed game 2, I think game 3 on the play, we've got a good shot. And then, you know, then we're like 6-1 going into that last game against Rakdos Midrange, so we have another chance to make day 2. So a little bit annoying. Although, to be honest, in a way, I kind of prefer having the losses down to misplays, because then at least I feel like I've learned something and I'm getting better at the game. You know, when you lose and you feel like it's just a variance, that's pretty frustrating. But in terms of the deck, I don't think I'd make any changes at all. You know, I have been tweaking this and working on it quite a lot, and I do feel like this is a really solid deck right now. I feel like it's still really well positioned, so I definitely recommend playing it if you're interested. I do think the Archon is a meaningful upgrade in the sideboard. March of Otherworldly Light definitely felt like the worst card in my previous build, and this is definitely a big deal against the Humans deck. But yeah, overall, really happy with the deck. Bit annoyed that I didn't make day 2, but still happy with how I played on the whole outside of that Wizards match. Definitely let me know in the comments if you like the video and you want me to see this, you know, if you want me to do this for future qualifiers, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Big up.